To order. Today, March 6th at 6 p.m. in 6 minutes. Present online, we have fellow colleague and committee member for the public safety is Counselor GIVNER. Counselor Todd McGee, who's president of the committee, will also be present later on. He's just dealing, I believe, with a family issue, or not like a bad issue, but he'll be late. With us, we also have Counselor Tessa MURPHY-ROMBOLETTI. Also present, we have Counselor Jose MALDONADO VELEZ. Online, it looks like we have Counselor Juan Anderson-Burgos, Counselor Linda Vacan.
Good evening.
And that is all we have for counselors. Coco, I want to entertain a motion to open the meeting and start with the first item.
A motion to take up item 1.
Second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Because the meeting is online, I'm not sure, Jeff, do we have to do roll call?
You do.
All right. So roll call. Counselor GIVNER, are you in favor?
Yes.
Counselor Rivera, yes. All in favor? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So item 1 was an order filed by Counselor Maldonado Velez. Myself and Counselor GIVNER. Order that an RFP be created to study a community responder model type program that is outside of the police department, but works in collaborations with that department as one of the several contributors. With me, I have Counselor Maldonado Velez, actually, and if you would like to speak more on the order, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm just pulling out. I know there's been similar orders that we put in about getting some sort of department created. I think I've said it from the beginning, we're tasking police with things that they should not be tasked with, particularly social work sort of work, and having a department that is strictly focused on the social work aspect of public safety. Public safety is greater than just the police department, and it encompasses a lot more. So really trying to create a department, again, that does not work with the police, but is separate, has its own sort of issues and different tasks. So similar programs around here. There's CREST, Northampton has something similar. There's a couple community responder models in Denver. So there's other things to look at and other examples to use. So that's really where that came from. And of course, as a new counselor, we just don't want to hey, let's just do it without actually having some sort of, RFP or study on how we can actually implement it in our city. So that's really where this order came from.
Perfect, thank you. Counselor GIVNER.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I was part of filing this order after doing some research around the AMHRST program, and they have what's called the CREST program. They had gotten some funding for it, so that was a pretty cool way for them to start it up. They have a full website with a lot of information, so I think they're a great model for us to start looking at. Obviously, AMHRST is a very different type of community and doesn't have the same types, or has some of the same problems, but not really at the scale that we deal with regularly. So they have a great program that we can use as a model, but obviously we would have to take it several steps farther in looking into how to make a program like that work for us. But I do think it's important to take some of that social work off of our police department, since there are many organizations in our community that can handle this type of work, and it'd be nice to incorporate them into a well planned out program like the CREST program in AMHRST. Thank you.
Thank you. I think for myself, one of the reasons why I co-signed and came onto this order is that there are a lot of functions that the police are kind of doing that they don't necessarily need to do. And it would be better for them to be doing actually policing on the streets versus being out there and doing things that we could have somebody through a community responder model helping us out do. Plus, it would probably save us on like time on task with regards to cost effectiveness. But that's just my reasoning for signing on, and as well as some of the ones cited by Councilor Maldonado Velez and Councilor Givner. I see Councilor Vacan is in the queue. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would just like to speak to the idea that our police department does have a very robust collaboration with a great number of the social service providers in our community. And so I would just want to make sure that we acknowledge that and document that before we're moving ahead with yet another sort of governmental or organizational structure. And I would also just like to throw into the mix, to make sure we're looking at it, that on one of the pages of the audit, a number that really stood out for me greatly was that when comparing, say, for example, Holyoke to Chicopee, Chicopee had twice as many patrolmen on the street as Holyoke did. So whatever funding we're using to do other services in the city, I really think we just have to be sure that we're not taking it away from the police department. So that would just be my commentary at the moment, but thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, maybe Councilor Maldonado Velez can speak more to.
I mean, I think, based on the police review and just, it's not necessarily to take anything away from the police, if anything, or I should say, take away the things that they aren't fully trained to do, essentially, and have those people that went through school, that have a social work background, really deal with these sort of social services. I think, I've said it, I've been very clear, there is a lot of things in our city. There's a lot of sort of like, we talk about enforcement, we talk about traffic. So there are reasons to have the police, but we're also giving them everything else on top of that. And we need to be honest with how can the police actually spend their time and, given the what they're here for, essentially. I think this whole, they talk about reform and like community policing, all these sort of things, but if we, in the city like Holyoke, and people talk about the crime rate and how dangerous it is, so we do need a police presence. Let them do police work so that there's other entity that can focus on the actual human beyond the response, but actually go into the prevention aspects of public safety.
So, and
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, give me 1 second. And to speak to like the collaboration piece, I've seen firsthand the collaborations that they worked with a variety of different nonprofits within the agencies. One of them I've briefly worked with Ed Case. It's called the Hub, where they're doing a lot of close work with a lot of variety of different nonprofit agencies. I championed that from the beginning. That is the intention. That is what we want in the community, right? To be able to provide services to the best of our abilities. But I think to provide services to the best of our abilities, we got to think outside the box sometimes. And if that means collaborating with another entity within the city that is probably going to be newly formed because everything is evolving over time, then that's something that makes sense for us to look into. It would behoove us to take advice, I would say. Councilor Vacan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do agree with that, but I also did note in the context of the audit that they commented upon how large a number of police department positions that would normally be dedicated to patrol have been carved out into special positions. Now, I know that a certain counselor says all the time that we can't speak to contracts, we can't negotiate contracts. And I totally acknowledge that we do not have a role in negotiating contracts. But I do believe it is appropriate for us to comment on the effects of the contracts. And when those contracts over, and I don't know how many years it's been, 10, 20, 30 years perhaps, have evolved to a point where we have half the number of patrol on the streets as Chicopee, I think there needs to be a very serious look at how many people have been taken out of the patrol rotation, and that needs to be fixed. And so I'm a big fan of collaborations between groups and people with different skills to try to deal with root causes, but we also have to make sure that we have the basic support for boots on the ground so we're not burning out our first line patrolmen who are, based on my read of the report, are pretty much telling us they're pretty much burned out. So thank you for hearing my perspective.
Thank you, Councilor Reagan. And then I think for the sake of the report, I think I mean, we can reference it from time to time, but like just to not get into deep details because they're going to have to present it eventually. But that's pretty much it on my part. Councilor Maldonado Velez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I think to your point, the police audit is item 10. This one in particular, I think part of it is we're not just starting the new department that we want to see. We're trying to request a study around it. Is it feasible? How do we actually implement it? So I think that's the conversation that we're trying to have here. And if we decide as a community, hey, this is something that we want to do, then yeah, we should have a study on how to best implement it. So I also want us to be, take that into consideration that we're not talking about how we're starting our department tomorrow. This is talking about having an RFP so that we can study and see if this is something that we can do and how to implement it, best way to implement it going forward.
Thank you. How would you like to see the order proceed?
So I know with this one in particular, assuming the mayor would need to come up with the RFP, or I don't know if this is something where the council comes. Hi, Mr. Mayor. I see you smiling. If it's something as a council can request a RFP, I'm not clear. So I think depending on how we can get the RFP conversation going, what would be the next steps, then I'm fine with whatever the committee decides to do with this order. Or if we want to table it for more information from the mayor, or if the mayor wants to speak on it, whichever.
I mean,
Up to you.
yeah, I guess that'll work.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is you guys will put together an order. I'm going to receive it, and that's where it'll sit until the time I can come around and actually do anything about it. So this body doesn't do RFPs, but I'm here, I'm listening, and I've heard it over and over, even when we met informally, and I gave you answers. It's something certainly that I like to explore if and when I can ever get there. Right now, there's a lot of, I hate using the word priorities because sometimes it means that to some people where one thing is more important than the other, but there are a lot of things that we're trying to build here in the city and take care of. And if I can incorporate this in our process during my time as mayor, I'd be more than happy to do it if and when the opportunity comes. But as far as this group and what you guys want to do, you can make a motion to accept, get the council to forward it to the mayor, and then I'll receive it, but it doesn't mean that the mayor's going to immediately take action.
For sure. Yeah, so I think based on that, with two things, we can either be complied with and revisit it, or if it's something that we are suggesting, hey, the mayor needs to do this, then we accept it. And we're like, so either one will land at the mayor's desk, I'm pretty sure.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry I'm not present. I am trying to get there. But I'm wondering if this is a good one to table for more discussion, because I think we need to figure out how to better present this information so that we can actually have more information together to send to the mayor, because it seems like right now it's not as complete as I'd like to see it. Just
All right,
putting
so
it to
you're,
you guys.
I entertain a motion to table the item.
Second.
All in favor, wait, hold on. I gotta do that. Cocaine Givner,
Yes.
myself, yes. All in favor? Yes. Item is tabled. Entertain a motion to take up item 2.
Motion to take up item 2.
Counselor Givner,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera, yes. Item 2 is that the police department provide an update on what steps and systems are being put in place to ensure that the shot spotter will work effectively and efficiently when the new technologies are installed. With us we have, I believe, the chief. Is he here to speak on this or no? Can he?
He's there.
Okay. So yeah. Thank you. I think so. For me, just to provide a quick narrative, the idea of filing this is pretty much to try to figure out what's the plan with regards to like utilizing it to the best of our abilities and making sure that in the future that we still have this technology up to date and constantly being upgraded. So like, what are the plans? What we have in place to make sure that we're using this to the best of our advantage, first of all, and then planning for the future to foresee that we can still pay for these technologies and the upgrades too as well. You raise your hand too.
You want me to speak on that now, or?
I mean, anybody, it's fine.
Okay. So just to let everyone know what we've done is, obviously we created an SOP. We did that in conjunction with the Springfield Police Department because they've had the technology for some time. And I know that was actually discussed at the meetings. It's like, let's not reinvent the wheel. They've got, pretty decent policies in place. And we reviewed those and created our own policy. We assigned 2 of our sergeants. One is basically the program manager, and his role is sort of like the liaison between us and ShotSpotter for every activation. It's reviewed, it's looked into to see what exactly happened if we get an activation, and then so that they can be reanalyzed if necessary through ShotSpotter. As far as leading up to us going live, for those that don't know it, we went live on the 1st. What we trained all our officers through a process. We trained about 1/3 of the department directly through ShotSpotter training. It was a 4-hour train the trainer program, and then those officers were able to come back and train the rest of the department. Also, the ShotSpotter group was able to set us up with, for lack of a better way of saying it, was like a practice run for a couple weeks leading up to going live, where every half hour they would send out an activation that wasn't from Holyoke, but it allowed all the officers to sort of play around with the app and get used to the technology and how it comes in and how they're going to actually utilize it. I thought that was extremely helpful. Any type of new technology, you got to get in there and play with it to actually know what you're doing. So that went on for a couple weeks leading up to going live. So that's what's been done, and we're off and running with it.
Mayor Garcia.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief. The other thing too is, so we do have our Police Relations Advisory Team. Actually, some members are here with us, and we've talked about this on multiple occasions, trying to understand key questions that we want to keep in the back of our heads as we go forward with implementation and trying to assess the effectiveness of the program. Questions around the effectiveness, how will the city know its effectiveness, whether or not it's accurate, and if the benefits outweigh the costs, what are the costs and what are the benefits? And I know I've met with our friends over at Neighbor to Neighbor who are very clear, and I agree about having a third-party assessment involved as we go forward with implementation. The 2 years of the piloting of the program. So it is something that I do hope to bring to your attention sooner rather than later, so that we have a team here in play under contract that has the skill and the capability to do that level of assessment, asking the right questions, because how we define effectiveness is different depending who you speak to and the success of the program, and we want to make sure that that we have some sort of educated study done to better unravel this, so that we have a true conversation on the effectiveness of the program after the 2-year period. And that's something I hope to bring a proposal in front of you in the hopes that we get a contract secured in fiscal year 24, so we can start having those conversations and what it is that they'll be evaluating and so forth. But those conversations have been happening, and those are some of the things that we're trying to bring to light, and I'm hoping that as we go forward, we can make sure that we're on top of that as it relates to the ShotSpotter system.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Councilor Givner.
So I just wanted to understand that correctly. So, in order to secure a contract, we want to secure a contract before we start talking about the effectiveness of the system. Is there any way to start creating parameters of what we see as effectiveness before that?
Councilor, I guess what I'm looking for is folks with the background that can help facilitate the conversation and what it is we're looking at. When I say enter into a contract, I don't mean we're going to assess it right then and there. It's having the folks on board and having these discussions with us and key stakeholders, so that we're putting together the methodology of what they'll be looking at in year 2 once we've done the pilot. You know what I mean? So it's almost like we're bringing them on board 2 years in advance, so that we're working with them now and building something now, so that when the pilot period ends, those conversations are already had and we can start moving forward with the actual evaluation. So I'm hoping we can bring them in 24. We can bring them in fiscal year 25. The intent was to have a skilled and capable firm here contracted with us, having those very discussions to understand better. Because there's a lot of things involved there's ideas that we might have and that you guys might have, and there are things that a skilled firm would know and would want to bring to light, that we want to be sure that we're incorporating in whatever the scope is of what we're looking at when it's time to actually do the evaluation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor MALDONADO VELEZ.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my questions are, I guess, around the effectiveness. I think many of us on Facebook were aware that ShotSpotter is currently active. My questions are on that. I don't know if it's that specific incident, or I guess you can talk generally. I'm just thinking of this one incident from this past weekend. You have one shot around 650 Dwight Street, which is over by the post office, and you have another shot 198 Oak Street, which at least is like 6-7 blocks away. So, my understanding with ShotSpotter is supposed to pinpoint you, bring you over like in a 2-3 block radius. So my question is, how effective is that technology this past weekend when you have a radius of almost 8 blocks that you're looking for, and you're finding that specific person? So I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Well, the way I look at it is that call was never called in, either one. ShotSpotter is supposed to get us within that perimeter, and then we do what we do. And in that particular case, as you know, we located an individual with a gun, and he was arrested. So in my mind, it's effective.
I just want to know it's 1:30 in the mornings. People are sleeping, so that may be a good reason why people are not calling. But yeah, I guess we'll just keep on the eye and hopefully get more information to see how this technology is. We all know it's no secret that I was against it, but it's here, so let's see how it works for our city.
I think I'd clarify that it's not that why people call in. That's not the point. In this particular case, we received no calls to dispatch, so we probably would not have found out about this shooting until the next day, which is, a huge time lapse from the time the incident actually happened. And hazard a guess that individual would not still be in the area, by the next day.
Mr. Chair?
Real quick, so do we know if the individual, the gun that was found was a gun that was shot? Or would we know that? We wouldn't know that, right?
Do we know it
Like, would we,
100% right now? I'd say no, but I'd hazard a pretty good guess. I'd lay a bet on it.
okay. Councilor Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to note that from my perspective, it seems like the shot spotter worked as advertised. And I did give that feedback to our police department when I read the initial report and then when I read the follow-up article. And it seems like, at least for this initial situation, it serves the purpose of getting these illegal guns off the streets. And so I hope this is an indication of how it will continue to work to help promote the safety for everybody in our city. So thank you to the folks who brought this to us, and I look forward to further reports where we can continue to evaluate how it is effective and how effective it is, because I always think it is worth looking at programs to evaluate how they are functioning, but I think this was a good first indicator. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bacon. Councilor Tessa Murphy-Romboletti.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Mayor, for providing us with more information. I guess I'm wondering if you guys have thought of a plan in place to keep us in the loop on how things are going. Like, I understand that this was the first week having it and a press release was put out, but if there's an opportunity for follow-up information that can be provided to us, the kind of questions that Councilor Rivera is asking about, will we know more information after the fact that will just help us understand? And I just don't know, is there, do you have a plan in place for moving forward on how often we can get updates, or would you prefer that we file an order and have you come back in each quarter, or,
It's kind of like two things. If we wanted to do something like that we were on a regular schedule, I have no problem coming in every month, 3 months, whatever you feel is appropriate. As far as update individual day to day, I think those are easily handled through emails as well. We could set something up, if you wanted some type of group email for the council, and we could, if a counselor had a specific question about an activation, we could give whatever information we could. I mean, obviously, if it's an ongoing thing, we'd have to look at that, but for the most part, I have no problem with any of that.
Great. I think, for a lot of us, we weren't sure after the vote got approved for the grant to cover Shot Spotter. It was kind of like, when's it actually going in, and like what's happening? And then I think a lot of us just saw the press release and we were like, oh, I guess it's in. So I think just going forward, it would be helpful for us to get some regular updates. And then I think the only other question I had, I think I lost it. Oh, can you just confirm which wards this is in currently, activated in?
The, where the activations happened, or you mean what ward the whole thing covers?
What ward, I guess, well, I'm more curious of like what this is all going to cover, but
I could send the council like there is a map that shows the whole coverage area.
okay.
That's probably easier. I could send that.
And are you
I
planning
think
to,
we gave it to you already, but we can.
I think so.
I think it's wards 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay. And
And
then
maybe a little bit.
is it a phased in approach on activating it?
No, it's all up and running.
Okay.
The
All
whole
right, cool.
thing. It's a 2 square mile radius.
Okay.
It's activated now.
Thank you.
Councilor Givner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the information reporting, I was going to ask something similar about in the reports that we got, or like the data that we got about ShotSpotter from the company. There were a lot of stats from like other Massachusetts cities and some nationwide cities, but it would be nice if there's like just a report that could be generated that tells us how many times it's, you know, the police department has been notified by the system, and then also what came of those notifications. So I think that'd be a great way to start tracking how effective the system is. You know, if we know when notifications are sent from it and what happens with those notifications as far as action and what, you know, comes out of that action, I think that'd be really helpful. And I agree, an email would be fine, but it'd be really great if we could have like a pretty regular email so that we can all kind of look at the data and then as it's coming in. Thank you.
Councilor Murphy-ROMBOLETTI.
Okay, I remember the one other thing I was going to say. This is my moment where I advocate in front of the mayor for a crime analyst
Yeah. I was
in
gonna
our
mention that.
police department.
I was
Thank
actually
you,
going to
sir. I
mention
know we've talked about it, so I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you for that, because I was actually going to bring that up. And also like plans for the future, like for maintenance and keeping up with the technologies. Because one of my things, I was also against it, and mostly because of the fact that we put up cameras years ago when I was in high school, and they were supposed to do something similar to what this is doing. And now we fast forward 20 years later, and the cameras are not functioning. There are a lot of different issues with that, and cameras would be a lot more helpful than just the sound, in my opinion. But we'll see. There's a lot coming. But at the end of the day, for me is mapping out some sort of plan with keeping up with some of this stuff, because for me, a lot of this stuff ends up losing the energy a couple years into them, a lot of the projects.
I could speak to that a little.
Yeah.
A big difference between this and the cameras we purchased and we maintained them and took care of them. These are more like under still ShotSpotter's control. If they break, they fix them. They keep up with the technology. They, you know,
But they also
place
keep
it
the
off part of
information,
our
right?
cost.
The information,
our-
they keep it, right? Anything that's being recorded or all the other stuff, they have the
And
rights to
and
that
that's part of our
information.
program manager's
Right.
position is to coordinate with them to get all that information for us. But that's all I'm saying is if there's upgrades technology-wise to this system, those will
There'll
be
be no
done
cost of
as
us?
part of our cost, our yearly cost.
Okay.
So it's not like the cameras, we bought them and then we owned them and then we did our best to keep up with them, but we probably should have done something more like this maybe 20 years ago.
Right. Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'd like to entertain a motion to make it the order complied with.
Motion that item 2 be complied with.
Second. Oh, Todd is here. Okay. Councilor McGee's with us too online. I didn't even see it. So he seconded. Roll call. Councilor Givner,
Yes.
Councilor McGee,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera, yes. I would like to entertain a motion to take up item. Go ahead. I was going to say item 4 real quick. Because
Motion to take up item 4 out of order, please.
Second. All right. Roll call. Counselor Givner,
Yes.
Counselor McGee,
Yes.
and Counselor Rivera. Yes. Item 4 was filed by Counselor Maldonado Velez and signed, co-authored by Counselor Jenny Rivera. Order that the Chief of Police, business owners, and residents that live in those communities are invited to discuss safety measures to prevent shootings. We would also like to invite the licensing board to discuss the process of what happens when a licensed business has incidents that heavily impact public safety. The purpose of this order is to provide the public some transparency given the recent shootings at said business, and to advise the city council on any legislative steps we can take. Councilor Maldonado Velez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're not aware, you are aware now there was a shooting over at Unicorn Inn. I think a lot of the questions that came around it is what happens to a business when there's a shooting that happens inside the business, particularly when it comes to the licensing board, and then also, like what are the steps that come after that? I know there was, there was just a ask from some community members, like, how are they still in operation? Now, I know the Unicorn Inn, and I know the owner there, so not trying to say let's shut them down. That's not what I'm trying to do with this order. I just really want more information as to when an incident like this happens, what should the people of Holyoke expect is happening to make sure that, we're keeping the people in there safe. So I don't know, just want to know what steps are being taken, what the conversations were around that.
And I believe from the licensing board, we have with us Michael Muyardi.
Yeah.
And that's it for now?
Chair Luciano had to leave.
Okay.
The only one here from
All right. Thank you.
may come forward.
Yes.
Good evening.
How are you doing? So yeah, I guess from what I'm understanding from Councilor Maldonado Velez is an explanation of process, I guess, of when some things like this happen, and just to inform the public to make sure that we are aware that there is process, right, and then what ramifications and reasons why some decisions. I mean, to the best of your abilities, I guess. But if I don't want to speak for you. All right.
So as you probably know, we're a 3-member board appointed for 6-year terms by the mayor and approved by the city council. We are supported by staff. There were 2 staff members associated with the planning department who support the license board on a full-time basis. One of them has recently left, so I assume that position will be refilled in the near future. And most of the clerical and planning is done in association with the license board. So we're a group of 3 nearly volunteers. We have a small stipend, but we meet monthly typically. If there's an incident, it is possible for us to come in on 48 hours notice. We have to obey the open meeting law, as any public body does. In the 2 years that I've been on the license board, there have been 2 incidences that have involved shootings. We don't get reports routinely of every problem that would happen at a licensed establishment. That's not a norm. But when there is a shooting, it certainly is brought to our attention at a minimum during the course of the next meeting that takes place. We have received like emails that there's been a shooting at a location. And so then it's very fact specific at that point. You know, what exactly happened. So just kind of giving you a broad overview of what happened on the 2 occasions that I've been on the board might give you some sense of what to expect. The first incident was in the vicinity of the clubhouse, but was not within the clubhouse. It was a summer evening. There'd been a shooting out in the parking lot at the South Street Plaza. that was brought to our attention. However, it was quickly noted that it was not an incident related to any activity inside of the bar that anybody could speak to. It was well away from the bar. We kept it on our agenda and followed up the following meeting where the police department was able to come in and say, yes, there was not any known concern with the operations of the bar. It seemed to be sort of an isolated incident that happened nearby, although by people patronizing the bar, not surprisingly. So there was really no action for us to take regarding the license at that point. It was a little bit similar with the recent incident at the Unicorn. In that case, that happened on a December evening, as you may recall. There was actually a side issue going on that was unrelated to this. All of the licensed establishments have to submit paperwork showing that they have been inspected regularly, both by the building department and by the fire department. And if they don't pass that inspection, they have to resolve any issues that were noted and be re-inspected and show that to us. Our practice, because we have a window when we renew licenses that starts in October, when we get a list from the ABCC, is to get the notices out, and then people schedule their inspections and they come in. We will typically, in the beginning of December, and even do a second meeting in December, review everybody's license, and we'll make a conditional approval for most license holders. If they're missing something, their license will automatically be approved when they take care of that inspection issue or insurance issue or fee payment issue, what have you, okay? So in the case of the Unicorn, there had been an inspection issue. It was a relatively minor one, but a somewhat time-consuming problem to resolve by the end of the year. Our licenses are for a calendar year. So if you don't meet your conditions, the license clerk cannot issue your license until that gets resolved, which essentially puts you out of the service of alcohol business until you get it resolved. Okay, I tell you all this background because at the very late part of December when this incident happened, the Unicorn actually did have an issue like that outstanding. The management voluntarily suspended all operations. This was in large part due to the very traumatizing nature of what had occurred for their staff, as well as public concern and their own concern. By the time we met at the beginning of January, they technically would have been able to open if it was only an issue of this incident taking place, because we hadn't had any kind of a hearing. There hadn't been any sort of opportunity to allow the establishment's owners to have been heard. So technically, they could have opened up. However, that other technicality, that license, actually kept them out of business for a couple of weeks anyway. Okay, and everybody agreed. You know, what we want to do is see that a safety plan has been drafted, that's been reviewed by the Hoyoke Police Department, that more information was made available, because the investigation, when we met in January, was still a very new meeting, or a very new investigation. So by the meeting, and we scheduled a special meeting for them in mid-January. By the time that had happened, Captain Moriarty, not a relation, by the way, know him well, but Captain Moriarty came in, reported that he had reviewed the safety plan. We also had looked at the safety plan, but defer to the police department because that's not our area of expertise. Said he was satisfied with it, satisfied that the manager of record and other staff showed the capacity to follow it with fidelity, and did not indicate that there was a concern with the operation of this establishment that should cause them to not be able to open their bar back. So they did open their bar at that time. So it was an unusual chain of events. If there had been an inspection that wasn't going to hold things up, it may have gone a different way, because we, at that point, do have to have a proper hearing. We've got to give the license holder an opportunity to be heard. We will usually want the public to have an opportunity to voice concerns that they would have, especially people who might have been witnesses to an incident or involved in an incident. Nothing like that was a factor in this. No one from the public came to complain about the operation of the Unicorn Inn. In fact, if anything, people were there praising their operations. But we do have to afford that hearing because if a bar is not given the hearing, then they have no capacity to appeal to the ABCC, and they have a right under statute to appeal to the ABCC if the local license board takes an adverse interest or an adverse action to their license. So I hope that gives a fairly decent summary. A different set of circumstances could lead to a very different process than anything I just described.
Thank you. I just have one more question. I think, and not too specific to you, Mr. McGarty. I think the after effect. So we live in America. We have more guns per person than any other country in the world. That's just a fact. And with that said, so like what comes after? So I did have some friends that were in the Unicorn Inn, and we spoke about it afterwards. You said it was traumatizing. It is. We had an incident up in the Holyoke Mall. So I'm interested to know, and I guess this is more for the police or even the mayor, I guess, or something that we need to work on. What's the process? Like, how are we taking care of the community after these traumatic events happen? Are we giving them resources to like victim services program? Are we speaking to the people in the community? Are we beyond just the initial conversations, like getting the facts and to have hearings or anything else? Is there any extra steps that we're taking as a community to make sure that those that are being victimized in these spaces are being taken care of? So this is a general question, if there's any answer on that.
Good evening, Captain Matt Moriarty. How are you? Going back to the Unicorn, yes, we just didn't do your typical investigation. Mental health was offered with our partnership with BHN. Our investigators stayed in constant contact with the owners and staff. They were a great source of information and knowledge for this investigation. Very, very helpful and very open. So if all businesses acted as they did when these situations happen, which they don't happen a lot, investigations would be a lot quicker and a lot smoother. Pertaining to the incident at the mall, right after the incident, there was at least 2 to 3 days. We immediately met, we had our mental health officer, Brian Summers, with us, or detective. We immediately met with the mall management, and there was at least 2 to 3 days of mental health workers going up there, going to surrounding stores, individuals, having open sessions. Right after that, we also had a critical debrief with mall management, and it was open to all the stores, where myself, Detective Hamill, Detective Parnell, Detective Summers, and I believe Detective Seidel was there also, that we were there for Q&A. I think we were there for about an hour, hour and a half. And as usual with these circumstances, we left it open to the mall that anytime, anywhere, call us and we'll head back up. And once again, the obviously it was a traumatic incident, tragedy, I should say, and we immediately jumped into action, and it's very grateful. I'm very grateful that we have the agreements and contracts that we have with BHN. We were able to immediately offer counseling for anybody who was traumatized or just wanted to talk about the incident. And business cards, contacts were left, so even if it's weeks later, they can be still contacted and have someone to talk to. So yeah, we were out there offering it. I guess that would have been the shorter answer. Apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it? Oh, my bad. I didn't see. Counselor Tessa Murphy-ROMBOLETTI.
Just a quick question, and Mike, I'm sorry if you already answered this. I was taking a lot of notes. When someone comes in to apply for a liquor license or for their renewal, do you automatically ask them about a safety plan?
No, safety plans actually aren't a required element of receiving a license. This was actually something specifically requested following this incident because there was, just a sense that that would help the overall situation for them.
Yeah. I only ask because I know for cannabis facilities or whatever they are, we do ask for that, and the police department has to be provided that. I don't know if that is something that in your experience, might be worth considering adding to part of the renewal or application process?
It's a conversation I can bring back. Most of what we do is directed by state statute.
Okay.
In many ways, we carry out what the state law requires.
Yeah.
We do have some capacity to add to it somewhat. So that's a conversation that could be had. There is not really towards gun safety, but there is some requirement that the manager of record show experience, show certainly around tips training, the ability to make sure that there's not over service, understanding basic core operations of a safe and secure facility. But it's much broader than I think
Okay.
the sort of things we saw in the safety plan that was presented to us.
Yeah. Thank you. For what it's worth, I've seen more bar fights than dispensary fights, but, I don't know.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So I'd like to entertain a motion that the order is complied with.
Second.
I believe Councilor Givner just arrived, but
I'm coming.
I hear your echo.
so I'm gonna do.
There she is.
I'm gonna do roll call. Councilor McGee,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera, yeah. Councilor Givner.
Yes.
Item 4 has been complied with.
Motion to take up item 3.
Thank you, everyone. I'd be remiss just to say Chair Luciano did arrive here, but was unable to stay until the point.
Thank you, guys.
I'm recalled. Thank you.
Second on that motion. And roll call. Councilor McGee,
Yes.
Councilor Givner,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera. Item 3 is an order filed by Councilor Anderson-Burgos. Order that Chief Pratt come in to discuss a possible gun drop-off program. He filed this order January 10th. Oh no, it was tabled January 10th, 2023. Councilor Burgos, would you like to speak more before I hand it over to the chief?
No, I'm actually more interested in what the chief has to say. Thank you, Chairman Rivera.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chief. You have the floor.
Yeah, so upon seeing this, I did reach out to the DA's office. It's typical that I can't recall the last time we did one of these, but I do remember doing, I think, one way back. But the DA's office does usually get involved and help us, and we'll collaborate with them. We did reach out, and they're on board. We just have to basically get together and figure out a good time, date, place to make it happen. So I think this is something that we can definitely do, and I'm in support of it. I have no problem doing it.
So, would you want me to table this for now?
Well, no, I'm
No,
sorry.
I was actually asking the chief.
Actually speaking to Chief Pratt.
Yeah, but go ahead, Juan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I ask him one of these questions, which is, so are you telling me, Chief Pratt, are you telling me that there is a program, such a program? And if so, could you send me any information of such a program? I'd like to look at it and see how I can also get involved if I can.
Sure. I'll when I get the information from the DA's office, I can forward it over to you.
Thank you so much. So yes, table, well, I mean, it's up to the chair. Table it if you'd like, and we can continue the conversation once the program is ready and up and running.
Well, I don't think that there's no guarantee for the program. I think he's going to reach out and see if it's a possibility that they could do a program. But we'll table it so that way we can bring it up again in a couple months just to see where it's at, status.
Thank you.
All
Sure,
right.
thank you.
Is that okay, Chief?
That's perfect.
All right, perfect. Entertain a motion to table.
Motion to table item
Motion
3.
to table.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Oh man, this online stuff is crazy. So, roll call. Councilor Givner,
Yes.
Counselor McGee.
Yes.
Counselor Rivera. Yes. Item is tabled.
Motion to take up item 5.
Second.
Roll call for item 5. Counselor McGee.
Yes.
Counselor Givner.
Yes.
Counselor Rivera. Yes. Item 5 was filed by myself and co-signed by Counselor Jourdain, Murphy-Romboletti, and Counselor TALLMAN. Order that the Honorable City Council invite in the Chief of Police to discuss whether or not the department has a traffic squad. Ordinance references the designation of 6 officers that are required to act as traffic officers. Constituents are concerned with drivers that speed, eat stop signs, etc. Investment in a traffic squad, as city ordinance states, should help tremendously with mitigating some of our constituent concerns. Section 50-42 states traffic squad designation and training of members. The chief of police shall designate 6 members and such additional members as may from time to time be required to act as traffic officers. Such members shall receive and be given thorough and adequate training in the regulation and direction of traffic in accordance with a uniform and recognized standard. So for me, the idea in filing this is to find out if we do have 6 officers that are designated as the traffic squad, so that, or to be sure that we are complying with ordinance. And if we're not, then can we kind of pick 6 people to make it so that we're following ordinance? But Chief, go ahead.
Okay, so when I was first reached out by Counselor Jourdain, and I looked into this. So this ordinance was passed in 1972, 50 years ago. And I've been here since 1993, and we've never had a 6-man traffic squad in that entire time. I did some historical work, spoke to some people that were present during those days. Believe it or not, they're still around if you look for them. So at that time, it was very interesting too to hear the historical part of it, in that the traffic squad in those days, we didn't have computers. So the traffic squad was, you used to get like lists of unregistered cars, and those all had to be go through by hand, by by humans and looked at. That's something a computer does today. And that some of those officers had to be assigned inside to answer the radio from the people in the street to run those vehicles that they could run with internal systems. And we also, that traffic squad in 1972, apparently, they're also, the mills would get out of work, and all the mill workers would come out at the same time, and those traffic officers would go to certain intersections in the city to keep the flow of traffic moving. Don't really see that as an issue today, but what I would say is that I'm certainly not opposed to some traffic officers. One of the other historical things is that we had well over 100 patrolmen back then. Our city charter calls, that was designed long before even this ordinance probably, calls for no less than 85 and no more than 117 officers. We're currently operating down in the 90s. So there was more officers. What I've done since I took over, I've heard the calls for, I try to be responsive about traffic concerns. So, I have instituted what I can, when I can. We do designate people at times to a traffic car. As a matter of fact, I just saw a roster for tomorrow where we do have an officer out there doing specifically traffic. So I did a little comparison between 21 and 22. All our numbers have increased. We went parking violations from 647 up to 1,197 in 22. It's about an 85% increase. Traffic enforcement from 147 to 166, an 11.5% increase. Citations issued from 579 to 674, a 16.4% increase. And our overall calls for service had also gone up during that time. So, I'm sure later on we'll hear all about that in the audit. On top of that, I reached out to the Massachusetts State Police. I know at times we were having trouble with traffic, specifically the tractor trailer stuff, the J breaks. I know we had a big meeting on that. And they were more than willing and able to come in and help us specifically with that issue. And I collaborated at the time with the colonel, and he used some of his traffic grant and his extra patrols to bring in more people from the state police to do some more traffic patrols in the city. That was starting really in December. I thought it was a good time to reach out because our speed trailer signs usually kind of go down in the winter due to weather. So to get some increase at that time to continue to help us with the traffic concerns, the state police, what I got from them was from December 6th to February 16th. They did a total of 352 physical citations in the city of Holyoke. They included 12 arrests and 20 criminal summonses. It was just another collaborative effort with the state police. They're a good partner. When we need their help, they're always willing to step up and help us out. I felt, I heard the concerns from counselors and from citizens. Every once in a while, they talk to me too and tell me the same thing they tell you. So I think going forward, I have a plan in the budget to add 6 officers, and if we want to designate them to traffic, I'd be more than happy to do it. We'll see where that goes.
Thank you.
So that's what I found out.
Any other questions? So I guess for me, when the charter was created, I think the population in Holyoke was way larger than 39,000, 40,000 people, maybe about 100,000 around that time, 110,000. So if you go to officer per person, that's where that larger 117 officer thing would probably come from. But I agree. If you had more officers, you'd be able to do a lot more. I think a lot of our departments within the city, if they had more staff, they'd be able to do a lot more too as well. It's the same argument across the board between departments. I think for me though, it's just that, and it's sad to hear that since 1993, you've never heard of there being a traffic squad, especially for it being pretty much city law, right? That the department is kind of violating one of our ordinances, right?
Just real quick, I did also historically find out that they pretty much disbanded that even before, but definitely by 1980, it was gone.
Okay. And then, so can you give me some of those historical sources? Can you send me the emails with those? So that way I can look at them myself too as well.
There were basically former officers that were around during that time and could at least add some historical perspective.
So
I don't make suggestions.
So then maybe for us, I think the next step could possibly be either amending the ordinance so that way they're in compliance, because right now they're technically not in compliance. We don't want our department to not be in compliance with one of our ordinances, because that is not a good look. So maybe we file an order and send it to ordinance to amend the ordinance, or at least go over it to see how we can adjust it so that way we are in compliance with the ordinance. And then when the budget comes around, that's a different conversation with regards to that. It would be cool to actually have some traffic officers. I just don't think that when you hire someone new within that year, they're going to be trained up to be the traffic officers immediately. It'll take some time for that. But I'm fine with this being complied with, if that's cool with you. You have a question?
Not a question. I guess you would need to file another order to look at the ordinance, or this can just be referred to the ordinance committee. I'm not sure if that's.
Counselor Vagan, are you listening?
Like procedure wise.
I am.
Are we able to forward it over to ordinance to see if we could try to amend the ordinance so that way we're in compliance, or do we have to refile a new order for that?
I think it would be cleaner to file a new order because this one is really discussing whether the department is in compliance with it, and from the discussion, it sounds to me like now you want the ordinance committee to consider changing it.
I mean, just so that the department can be in compliance with ordinance, because if not, then like we're just, unless we're just gonna leave it like that, I'm totally fine
Right,
with
so
that
I think the cleanest way would be to have a new order filed that would ask the ordinance to committee to consider amending this ordinance.
All right, I'll be sure to file that. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Any comments? No? All right.
Motion that item 5 be complied with?
I say complied with for the follow-up that you're filing an order, or an action item to say it's complied with. I'll second that.
There you go. Second. Roll call for the motion that is complied with. Counselor Givner,
Yes.
Counselor McGee,
Yes.
and Counselor Rivera. Yes. So I would like to entertain a motion to take up 6, 7, and 8 as a package.
Motion to take up items 6, 7, and 8 as a package?
Second.
Roll call. Counselor McGee,
Yes.
Counselor McGiver. I mean, not my Givner. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Counselor Rivera. Is that the McGee and the McGee? Yes. Items 6, 7, and 8 were filed by Counselor Vacan. Order that our city engineer evaluate and determine the installation of a crosswalk. The crossing guard stands on the corner of Kane and Knollwood Circle. This is a request from school staff and other school committee member. And then item 7, order that traffic calming measures be recommended by our city engineer for Bray Park Drive and access to the plaza. Install temporary speed humps, Bray Park Drive to slow traffic. And then 8 is order that our city engineer evaluate the intersection of Evergreen and Bray Park to drive for improvements due to safety concerns. Councilor Vacan, would you like to speak, like kind of elaborate on them?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's my understanding from our engineer, Chris Baker, that he was going to send a memo over to committee tonight because he has a conflict with a board meeting over in Public Works. So I haven't seen the document, but I'm hoping you have it.
Yeah, I have it. I could read it in if you. I was going to, but I mean.
Okay, that would be great because in looking at my emails, I just didn't see it.
Yep, I got you right now. So for item 6, Chris says that the engineering department is in the process of contract change with Mass DOT to add this location to our FY23 shared streets and space grant awards, since there are 2 locations that were originally proposed which are no longer feasible at this time. More information will be available on the possibility of this as a funding source within the next month. If we are unable to install this in FY23, the engineering department would add it to the planned shared streets and space grant application for FY24. So
Now, is that in relation to the crosswalk?
that is in relation to to determine installation of a crosswalk. Yes, in front of Kane and Knollwood Circle. So by McMahon probably.
Okay, so yes, so he is finding that it's warranted.
It sounds like he's trying to get it done with shared streets and space grant funding for FY23, and if he can't get it done for FY23, he will be putting in the application for FY24.
Okay, thank you.
Item 7, he says, as discussed at the February 28, 2023 ordinance meeting, the city engineer does not recommend speed humps on Bray Park Drive based on speed and volume data collected on the roadway. Please refer to meeting minutes and correspond. Oh, so this is the one we spoke about at the ordinance meeting the last time we were in.
Yes, and I'm aware of that. I
Okay.
didn't know if he had any other further or different recommendations at all.
It doesn't seem like he does right now.
Okay,
And then item 8, he says, it is my understanding that the approval of a yield sign to be placed at the end of Evergreen Drive at the northbound approach with Bray Park Drive was approved by the committee level and subsequently by the City Council on November 1st, 2022. If the order was not previously passed, it would be my recommendation to install a yield sign at this location and send the approved order to the DPW for installation. Order that the city engineer evaluate the intersection. So for item 8, it seems like he is recommending a yield sign, and we could order, if it's cool with you, file this order as complied with and send the communication to DPW for installation of a yield sign at that spot.
Yes, yes. So for item 8, that would be great. If the committee approves the recommendation of the engineer, that would be great.
All right, so
And
go ahead.
item 7, I guess it would be the committee accepting the recommendation of the engineer. And item 6 would be accepting the recommendation that a crosswalk be installed by one funding method, and if that's not possible, then the secondary method, right?
Yes.
Okay, that sounds good to me, thank you.
And then 8 was complied with, right?
To approve the yield sign as recommended?
Yep.
So, motion to accept the recommendations from our city engineer for items 6, 7, and 8.
Second.
Second.
Roll call. Counselor McGee,
Yes.
Counselor GIVNER,
Yes.
and Counselor Rivera. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So, motion to take up item 9.
And 10.
Oh, sorry.
up
Motion to
9
take up
and
item 9 and 10 as a package.
Second.
A roll call. Counselor GIVNER,
Yes.
Counselor McGee,
Yes.
and Counselor Rivera. Yes. Item 9 is filed by myself and Counselor McGee. Order that the mayor be invited to a public safety meeting for presentation of the police department audit. Then item 10 from Mayor Garcia, police audit documents. That's, I believe, he'll be presenting on them now.
Good evening, councilors. Should we begin?
So I want to thank you guys for being here. With us, we have Mayor Garcia, Chief Pratt, names of the 3 individuals. They could introduce themselves or they can give me their names, whichever one they feel.
I'm Sean Kelly.
I think you might have that on. Okay.
Sean, turn on your microphone. Sean.
So I think the issue, Sean, you might have the volume on your laptop, and if you do, you got to silence that and then turn on your microphone. So that way, yeah, the little button. Let's hope it's right.
There we go.
Hot mic.
Sean Kelly from Municipal Resources Incorporated.
Thank you, Sean. Pleasure meeting you. And who else do we have?
I'm with Dave Kurz and Mike Magnet.
It's a pleasure meeting you all, and thank you for coming. Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 1 year, 6 months, and 1 year, 6 months is how long I've been serving as the mayor of the city. Excuse me. For a year and a half, I've been attempting to unravel and change issues that have been built up for decades, issues that haven't allowed us to progress to the extent that I know that this city is capable of, issues that have built a deficit and contributed to a negative free cash balance certification, issues that make it difficult to appropriately manage our assets, our resources and services, issues that have cultivated a culture that couldn't attract or retain employees, issues where City Hall's climate was distrust and silos, issues that even divided people, even members throughout the years, members of this body, as well as members from the public and City Hall. All these issues, they impact every department. It eventually impacts services. It also impacts the quality of life and makes its way to the tax rate. That's what I inherited. And although I've been in office for 1 year and 6 months tackling these issues that built up for decades, I want folks to know that I take full responsibility as the commander-in-chief of this city and will do anything it takes within my legal power to keep making the hard decisions on behalf of the public so that we put our city on a better course. And I do hope by now that I've proven to members of the council of my commitment and level of transparency to make these hard decisions collaboratively with all of you. Tonight, we're looking at the police department. Shortly, you're going to hear a presentation from MRI to go over their report. But before we dive into that, I do want to make a point first that I think is important for everybody to understand before going into this. This report, as I explained to many folks, it's not the covenant. It's not the Holy Grail. I'm not sitting here tonight telling you that this is the know-all, say-all. I'm very well aware of all concerns across the spectrum as it relates to the report, its process, and people's opinions about policing, most of which I'm sure we're going to go over tonight. Whatever direction these discussions go, I understand that we all have a shared desire to see things be better. How we get there is where all of our thoughts differ, and that's okay. For the first time in a long time, a path has been created to get us here, into this very space, to start these discussions of what the landscape is like at the department, identify what is it we do well, and where are we falling short, and even go over a series of recommendations of how we can be better. So my goal for as long as I'm the mayor is to continue to assess services, whether in the police or any other department, listen to community priorities, offer solutions so that we can move forward, discuss them, and move forward together. Because what we're dealing with are structural changes, which can be complex, very complicated stuff. And the only way that we can actually make any type of meaningful progress on any of these, and today we're talking about the police department, is if we understand them and work together through them in order to get us a little bit closer to how we want the department to be, considering the diversity of perspectives. So with all that said, I do want to really quickly just thank everybody that was involved through this process, members of the Police Relations Advisory Team, members within the police department, and our police chief, who has been extremely cooperative and embracive through this. Also wanted to thank the council for also supporting getting this done. So with that being said, I want to pass it over to MRI so that they can begin their presentation. I'm very much looking forward to hear a healthy discussion, no matter what form that takes, because like I said, we're in this space, and for the first time in a very long time, we've never really had this opportunity to have this kind of level of discussion. And if we're gonna move forward in any direction, it's important that we acknowledge and understand what are on people's minds, listen to some of the experts that we brought in, and take what's given to us and continue the conversation amongst this group here so that we can try to implement the change to these institutionalized and structured situations that we have in front of us. So with that, through the chair, if you want to introduce Sean to begin the presentation.
Sean, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give me a moment to bring up our screen. Unfortunately, hold on. Yep, there we go. Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience while I work through these little technological lovelies that I enjoy so much. As I said, I'm here today with Dave Kurz and Mike Magnet. We're from Municipal Resources Incorporated, headquartered in New Hampshire. We're happy to be here. We did what we like to refer to as a 30,000-foot view of the Holyoke Police Department, assessing their operations in terms of risk to the community. To do that, we were here visiting the city, meeting with many of the police officers and staff at the Holyoke Police Department. We met with city officials and some volunteers. We did a comprehensive look at a number of relevant documents, compiled statistics, conducted in-depth interviews with employees, in some instances going more deeply into areas than we thought we would need to. And then we also did a survey of employees. We did that after some of the employees expressed reluctance to speak openly in front of their peers, which is a very common occurrence in every workplace. So we added the survey for an anonymous response from folks. The last thing we did also was to compare the Holyoke Police Department to comparable communities in the Commonwealth to see how things stacked up between the Holyoke Police Department and their peers, again, throughout the Commonwealth. This PowerPoint presentation is not intended to be a stroke-by-stroke rehashing of our report. Instead, it is designed to encourage discussion with the committee, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So in front of you, this slide, this is information that generally the local government will always be familiar with, whereas some of the viewers may not be. This is the makeup of your city population. One of the questions that we've asked answered a few times since this report was given to the mayor and subsequently published was, and even me with using all my fingers and toes can add up this math and it comes out to greater than 100%. So the question was, how is this possible, Sean? And very frankly, the numbers that you have in front of you are directly from the United States Census Bureau. And what they do is they report their statistics based on responses during the census. And in some instances, there are people that report themselves both as white and Hispanic, white only or Hispanic only. And so these numbers get changed or expanded on, and they add up, frankly, to more than 100%. That's just the way it is. And, but that's an accurate reflection of the most recent United States Census. In the Holyoke Police Department, this is what is intended to be the authorized budget for 122 police officers. That works out, as you can see there, roughly 3 officers per 1,000. And in a few minutes, Dave is going to be talking to you about our workload analysis of the Holyoke Police Department and whether or not that number is realistic moving forward. Most recently, the Holyoke Police Department handled greater than 42,000 calls for service. When you consider a city of 40,000, that doesn't seem like a lot until you're pushing a patrol car around town and answering calls for service with so few personnel. And again, that's something that Dave is going to talk about later. And even earlier tonight, you had a discussion about some of the civilianization recommendations that we have in this report in terms of how can we push more police officers out on the street. All right, so one of the things that I asked Chief Pratt to produce for me, and by the way, this report, this study could not have been possible without an extraordinarily high level of cooperation from Chief Pratt and his staff. Every level of the police department, from the junior-most police officers and staff right through the chief's office, we received complete cooperation. They were interested, motivated, and very helpful with respect to giving us the answers we need to be here tonight. The other thing is that there were members of the community, they're sitting behind us here, the Citizens Advisory Committee, that were fantastic, very welcoming. We enjoyed their company and to hear their input as we went through this process. So going back one slide, please. With this makeup of the police department, I asked Chief Pratt about this, and of the authorized strength presently, as of January 2nd this year, the Holyoke Police Department is made up of 36 Hispanic police officers, 5 of which are female, and with a total female staff of 14. So as you can see in the city makeup there on the left-hand side of that graphic, that is not completely representative of the population of Holyoke. That leaves room for improvement, and that discussion has been had with Chief Pratt, and he, again, I can't emphasize enough the level of interest and cooperation from him and his office. I think that the spirit of this and intent of this study, Chief Pratt is living it. I have no question of that in my mind. Okay, so with this next, I'm going to turn this over to Dave Kurz, and he's going to talk about our SWAT. I should say, let me ask if you want us to talk about our SWAT. We can hit these slides, and if there are particular slides that you want us to spend some time with, we're happy to do it. Otherwise, we can move right along.
If it's up to me, you guys can talk about whatever you want to talk about. But Counselor Givner or Counselor McGee, if you're with us, I'll let you guys opine.
I think it's a great idea to have a thorough run through of what went down for all of those who didn't have a chance to read this report, especially for the public that's watching.
Yeah.
Very good.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
Dave?
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Kurz, and the area that I oversaw and wrote on in this report was regarding the SWOT exercise. It stands for, as you can see here, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's really it's been in the business world for many years, well, since 1970s. But it's really designed to elicit conversation and focus on areas where we could benefit jointly from hearing from the people who are tasked with doing these things on a daily basis. So, and we did this in a variety of different ways so as to be as unbiased as possible. So, for instance, we had all patrol officers together as opposed to having supervisors with them, so that they wouldn't feel dominated by that. You know, so they weren't subordinates. And we did that through every rank, and we did it with the civilian review board, and we did it with several counselors that we invited to attend, and there weren't as many as we would have liked, but it was certainly open for their invitation, and we appreciate the valuable time for all the people.
I never got invited. Just saying.
Well, there's
Go
always
ahead. Now you can carry on.
There's always an aunt who's irritated about the wedding, so. I apologize for that. We would have loved to have had more involvement. I'm not sure what happened, but that was our goal, certainly.
Thank you.
So anyway, that was done, and while we're very interested in what's going on, we were really looking later on in the report with the data that would help us make some collective. But that's not to understand the importance of people who are being tasked with doing a variety of things and how they feel about doing it. So that clearly was very important. And there's just a brief synopsis on the several slides coming up on, if you want to move forward. Yes, thank you. So of course, being humans, we like to start with the negatives. These speak for themselves. We did encounter, I will say, before we got into the data, we encountered a very tired workforce. They really were tired. Anecdotally, I can tell you how I went in to utilize the men's room and in the male's locker room area, and there were several officers that were there. Getting ready to go on the next shift. And of course, they don't really know who we are, but we're in their locker room. I tried to engage them and talk to them, but you could just tell without being a psychiatrist that they were just exhausted. And that will come up later. 58% said they would leave given a similar opportunity of position. 66% felt they were undertrained. That was a major finding of our report. There is a significant lack of training here, and we kept hearing budget, budget, budget. But there's a program called field training. It's in the police acronym. It's called FTO, and that is pretty much a basic regiment of training. After a police officer graduates from the state academy, they were then brought to whatever community, in this case, obviously, Holyoke, and they are assigned to someone who is trained to do their training so that they're getting acclimated to the streets, to the radio system, to the building, to the security systems, to the uniqueness of this community. The radio, the record management system, how to do reports, all of these things that are very important, frankly, is maybe being done in Holyoke, but not in a formal field training way that we were disappointed not to see, frankly. And I hope that becomes clear because we're urging that to happen. And then when people are promoted to the next rank, we would recommend that they go to appropriate training for that. So that different skill sets come into play here. When you become, when you're a police officer, you want to understand the nuances of being on the street and interacting with people in a positive way. When you get promoted to sergeant, you want to understand how to supervise these people and get the best performance from them. When you go to captain, you know, all these different levels have different skill sets that would be important to be trained and sent away to be trained. So again, that's another recommendation. 70% said that the department wasn't keeping up with the technology, and we were seeing that in small ways ourselves. What's interesting to me, since we have no dog in this fight and will say what we should say, we will continue to say that. I had concerns leaving here in the aftermath of hearing about the shot spotter, that it wouldn't be maintained. And I'm glad to hear you all talking about that, supporting the chief on doing that, because I too, of the team, was somewhat dismayed to hear of the technology that is in this city that is not either being maintained or was allowed to not be maintained, that is no longer functioning. And that's a problem. And it seemed to me that if we got deeper into this, that would be a citywide problem. We have the money to buy, but there's so much technology that refrigerators don't last 25 years anymore. So you really need to make sure that that is taken care of. So the next slide would be the positive. That people love, yes?
If you don't mind, I had a quick question for the chief about the field training program. Have we ever had a field training program?
I think Dave hit on it. So it's not an accredited field training program.
Okay.
Okay, it's a very big distinction. They're going to
I
talk
see.
all about accreditation. So I mean, I can rattle on, or we just let them.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there is a structured program for doing that, and Holyoke does not have that. They are doing something, but not quite as defined, and we would recommend that it would be defined. So on the positive side, people love the people they're working with. They're very engaged. People are dedicated to this community. The police officers, to a person, love this city. We were very impressed with that sense of almost loyalty, almost admiration for the community. And I don't think collectively we could overemphasize that. They love police work. They recognize that they are cliches, that they want to make a difference. They're doing it for a reason. And they're working with really good people in the community who just want to be better, and they like that. And the entire esprit de corps, the unity, let's do things for the right reasons, it permeates this organization. So I got to tell you, as a team that collectively goes out and does this many places throughout the United States, we were duly impressed. So the other thing that this is something that we like to do at MRI is it's I'm reminded every time this is in here. I'm reminded when I was a kid that grew up in Saugus that if I wanted to go jump off into the Saugus River, my mother would say, just because Johnny doesn't mean you have to do it. Anyone we were on the same page. So while we've got comparable communities here, what can you do?
No, I was saying we have canals.
You couldn't jump in them.
I did though.
So the point of this exercise is almost, to be very candid, is almost to create silence in that, inevitably there may be a question of, well, what are they doing in Chicopee? What are they doing in Springfield? What are they doing over here? And sometimes it relates and sometimes it doesn't. But because every community is unique in its own way. However, there are certain things that does come out here that are interesting to us. You have more police officers per 1,000 here than the average community of this size, and it's more than warranted. There's a lot going on here, and we're going to get into that a little bit, where we think that they could be utilized in either different ways, or you should think about some civilianization within the department, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But anyway, finding a comparable community to Holyoke was really difficult. But these are the communities that responded. It's entirely voluntary. In fact, we asked the chief and his staff to ask other communities for this information because they're really not adverse to giving it to MRI. Like, well, what are we going to do with it? So it came from the chief. All the data is forwarded to us, and it's compiled in this way. So this is workload analysis for a police department is an incredibly insuccinct exercise. There could be multiple arguments about it, and I won't argue it at all, but this is one that we've used that certainly we're validating and comes from the data that is provided to MRI through the Holyoke Police Department. In a perfect world, every police officer's day should be made up of these three components. Obligated police work. Obligated police work is response to calls for service. A call for service, and you'll see it throughout this report, is whenever a citizen or anybody other than an officer calls for somebody in the Holyoke Police Department to do something, they have no choice. The officers must go. Therefore, it's obligated. It's not like they get a call and they say, oh, I don't want to wait on this customer. They have no option. They must go. Past that, they have to write about it. And sometimes, unfortunately, or it's just the nature of the position, the profession, is that sometimes writing the report about what happened or didn't happen takes as much time or more than the report itself. So they have to get their reports done. So that's another third of the day. And finally, one of the things that we heard certainly through the Citizens Committee is how, boy, would we love to see a traffic initiative. And that's proactive preventive patrol. And from what we found, it's a wonder you're getting answers to calls, let alone trying to get something else out of them. It's not going to happen. There's no way that this department is going to, with the way it's structured and the way it is right now, is ever going to provide that kind of something in a traffic enforcement initiative without adding people to the department to make sure it's going to happen. Something has to give, and frankly, our report thinks it's already given. You know, you're at the extremes already. Next slide. So, of the 122 officers that the city pays for that are authorized strength, 94 of those people are designated as patrol rank. In other words, their primary role as a police officer or patrol officer is to provide services to the community through generally patrol. However, we found that over time, 34, almost 1/3 of those patrol officers are diverted to other things. Now, some of those are detectives, and we fully embrace and recommend that continue. And in fact, we also saw a deficit for that. But what's interesting, and I get a little nervous talking off the top of my head here, but I believe that in other comparable communities that we analyzed, it's about 89% of their workforce, their patrol workforce, is dedicated to providing patrol services. And I think it's 64% or something along those lines of the Holyoke Police Department are dedicated to patrol. There's a real problem there. That's a deficiency. So, you budget, the city council budgets, the chief asked for 122 officers, and he has to pay them for 2,080 hours a year. That's 52 weeks times 40 hours a week equals 2,080 hours. That's what you start with. So in theory, you're thinking you have that many hours committed to patrolling the city streets. They're not. After we take out all of the combined leave that they're provided through union contracts, the training that they do in fact get, time that they're in court because they've written tickets or made arrests, or the comp time that's accrued, which is a uniqueness here in Holyoke. Generally speaking, and it's a millennial problem or a thing we see from millennials, where many officers used to like overtime. The staff and the people that you are hiring now, not you, but all of us are hiring, really value time with their families. It's kind of hard to argue that point. But the idea is that many officers in the past would take overtime. These officers will take overtime, of course, but they want time off as opposed to money. That's what they want. And so they hold on to it. And the bottom line is that of those factors, there's over 1,032 hours are deducted from those hours that they're now of actual available. So it's almost like a half a year. Officers are not available because of prior things that happened. Now, I'll go out on a limb, and I told the mayor I was going to say this, and I hope there's no rail or tar and feathers, but the reality is that I believe what's probably happened over the years is that union contracts, negotiating union contracts, and I'm talking like 20, maybe even 30 years ago for all I know, But years and years ago, when there was really difficult times, not that we're ever having good times, but that were there difficult times, and there was simply no money to give raises, somebody negotiated time off. So they said, I mean, you're already budgeted for 52 weeks a year. We know that. So if, in theory, you're giving another week off, not raising salaries, therefore you're not raising the budget, in theory, you're giving them time off. And someone looked like a hero, probably, because they didn't have to raise any money. Well, it's come to roost. So now people are now not available because they're on time off or other things because of union contracts. And while the recommendation isn't this explicit, it's going to take years for you to get back there. You're going to have to somehow negotiate, because nobody who's got 25 plus years in this department is going to give this up. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm a bright guy, but that ain't going to happen. So that's technical cop speak, I guess, because I am a retired police chief. But the bottom line is, I want to emphasize again, Dave Pratt's a nice guy, but I'm not paid to be friends with him. We're doing a report, and we got little meters that can tell when we're being lied to. We get no dog in this fight, so what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Whether you listen to it or not is up to you. It's our recommendations, but that's what it is. I want that to be clear. So, where am I? I got lost. So you're going to have to negotiate, whoever is going to have to negotiate with people who are coming on duty here. Not on duty, but are being hired now, because nobody that's in this union, is the union president here? He's sitting right there, isn't he? Okay, yes, nice to see you again. I doubt very much that they're going to roll over and play dead on this. So you're going to have to start all over with new people coming on, and that's probably going to cost you to do it. But somebody gave the farm away, and you're now paying for it. What is it? 349 hours per task. Yeah, okay. So when you divide that up, that's all the number of hours throughout the year, when you think about it, that it's being divided, because your officers who you're paying for 2,080 hours a year are only here for about half of it, a little bit more than half of it, 1,048 hours, that they're actually available to do patrol work. Now, that's an average. Some are here are more, but the average is that, okay? So, next slide. Any questions on any of that?
There are a variety of questions that people have, but we're just waiting.
Okay. Whenever you want, please interrupt me. Or, it's not interrupting me. Just ask me the question so we won't miss it.
It would take way longer, though, I think. I think it'd be better if you guys present, and then after that we come back with our questions. Because if we keep cutting you off, we'll be here till 11 o'clock.
Sounds good. Well, I don't want that. We got to go 3 hours after this. We love you guys, but geez, So, here's an example of what we were provided for information for the various titles or the tasks of people who are working not in patrol positions. These are the tasks that they're doing. And you'll note that 12 officers, which again we think is significantly understaffed in the Detective Bureau, are also assigned to that. Next slide. So, Chief Pratt, and we agree with his theory on this, or his desire to have at least 12 officers per shift. Currently, this is a 24/7 business. Every day they're working 24 hours a day. So right now, in his perfect world of having everybody on duty, and when we were here, I think there were 11 people who were injured on duty. They were not available to you. I think there were 6 vacancies and 8 people in the academy, or 8 people in the academy and 6 vacancies, one of those. But in a perfect world, you would have 51 patrol officers, 9 patrol sergeants who are what we would consider working supervisors, for a total of 60 police officers, who would then provide 12 officers per shift, 24/7. And your minimum by union contract, if this is correct, is 7 officers. 8? So that number, you can't go below that number. Somewhere along the line, the union was smart enough to see that the city was cutting shifts below that, and that becomes inherently dangerous. It's already bad enough it is with 8, but the bottom line is you actually only have 35 people available to do patrol. So, the chief was just telling me that he liked my quote about, you're going back and forth to a small well. You can't keep doing this. These people are exhausted, and they're going to make mistakes. They're going to get hurt. They're going to get tired. They're going to fall asleep at the wheel. There's a whole myriad of things that could go on here. It's not good. And the other thing is that we heard this was kind of like a sad commentary, but we can see the reality of it. What ends up happening is that because no one really wants to work this overtime that they know is on every single shift, that when they come to work, the probability of them being hungover, not hungover as in intoxicated, but required to stay over to the next shift grows because there's no one picking up the phone. People aren't coming in on that shift, so they're being forced to stay over. They're tired and they're exhausted. But they still love you, but they're still tired and exhausted. So that is a problem that you have inherently, and it is not going to go away. You're going to solve it when you get some people back from the academy, but I bet how many people are retiring this year, Chief? Do you have an idea?
I would say probably 3 or 4, and then going into January it'd be like.
So half of those people become irrelevant because you're already losing. This is like a constant hiring process that you've got to be going, and then you can't even get them in the academy because the state's backlogged. So you've got a problem inherently. Before they're not even on the street for, they can't even be on the street for probably a year. So that's a problem inherent to the training, which is why we talked about, or in the report, looking at some of these positions to civilianize. And this, too, shall be a problem with the union, in that some of these positions are probably in the union contract, and people who are there are now comfortable enough that they don't want to go out and patrol. I mean, welcome to human nature. So the reality is that you have things in this department that, in our opinion, are being accomplished by police officers that could be easily and probably significantly cheaper by civilians. And we urge you to look at that option. Okay. Am I done? Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
So part of what we did was we looked at the existing written directive system of the Holyoke Police Department and compared it to industry standards and best practices. And oftentimes that comes in the form of accredited police departments or accredited standards that suggest how a police department should be operating. In this instance, what we discovered was, in a general sense, generally, the Holyoke Police Department did have policy for all of the areas that you would ordinarily expect a police department in the 21st century to have policy on. What we didn't find was a substantial compliance with those policies. So by example, let's say that there was a policy said that an officer that goes to this type of call for service must respond this way and produce A, B, and C as a result. What we discovered was that, in fact, the police department did have that policy, but that there was no evidence that all 3 bullets were fulfilled in practice. What that does is, in essence, it invalidates policy. By, over time, it becomes the practice not to follow policy. And that's in terms of, again, as I started out, the management of risk, that being the purpose of this exercise, is that's not a good way to run your business. So that's the comment there. It's inconsistent. We're not saying that it's entirely absent. It's just not consistently applied. And when you look at the financial risk of the city in terms of liability, that's where your risk lies. Is that by not consistently applying it across the board and enforcing it and following up, the city then gets put into the position where they're subject to being sued. And they say, oh, you can indict a ham sandwich, and while that's true, anybody can sue the city for just about anything. The reality is that you're now in a position where you're enabling successful suits, frankly. The other thing that we really didn't get a firm grip on was, and Dave mentioned it earlier, talking about training. There are a number of training instances that the Commonwealth requires, and using that word inconsistent, we did not see consistent compliance with that, and frankly came away uncertain that the entire police department is in compliance with Commonwealth requirements for training. Dave touched on this a little bit earlier, and you're going to see it now. You're going to see it again later when we go to summarize. As Chief Pratt said, there's not a formal program, but they're doing something, and that's obviously a tremendous paraphrase on my part. The fact is that this foundational task is critical to the success of the Holyoke Police Department and ultimately the city of Holyoke over time. If you have as Dave told you, we have these 8 folks at the police academy. They come out of the police academy. If they are not formally trained, if there is not a specific program of instruction that tells them, okay, this is how you're taught at the police academy, this is the way you must perform those tasks in a practical way in the city of Holyoke, then the immediacy is lost. The primacy of that training is lost. And over the course of their career, it's like if you're a carpenter and you make a 1/8 mistake on the ground level, by the time you get to the attic, you've got a substantial problem. So now you're talking about in law enforcement over a 25-year career, if they haven't been taught correctly in the first instance, that can be now passed on to the next generation of police officers and the next generation of police officers because ultimately they're promoted, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, this is a great quote. I forget who said this to us, but we all jumped on it immediately. We think this is fabulous. Organizational culture eats policy for lunch. That's absolutely true. And absent a well-grounded field training program where you are building those foundational cultural expectations, policy doesn't mean anything without this foundation. It has to be there. Has to be there. So, you're going to hear a lot of recommendations from us. Field training, a formal, well-documented, well-developed, well-implemented, and sustained field training program is critical to the long-term sustainability of the Holyoke Police Department. Okay. Mike, were you on use of force? Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Dave. It happens to me all the time, bro.
My nickname's Grace. Again, this is in policy. As Sean said, one of the things that you'll hear us talk about accreditation. And we were talking in the mayor's office to him about this, and it will cost some money to get into the accreditation process. There's no question about it. I mean, nothing worth doing, I suppose, in this day and age doesn't cost some money. That being said, I also pointed out to him one lawsuit would pay for a lot of things. If you did it in policy, for instance, and wouldn't accredit. Your use of force policy, and I'm not even going to jest about this, but I don't know if there's any more critical policy in this day and age of how police officers, the parameters in which they use force, was aged. It did not reflect the current best practices, such as a clear, accredited policy would make requirements where each time a police officer under accreditation utilized any amount of force, which is defined by policy. So let's say that they use their taser, that they would have to write an additional report on the use of that taser to ensure that it fell within policy. All of these reports throughout the end of the year would then be analyzed it would be required to be analyzed by someone within the department to determine if Dave Kurz is using force too much. Or maybe if I am, it's because I'm on a busy shift. That might be an explanation. Or, for instance, if Dave Kurz is using it, it falls out of policy. There's a problem with Dave Kurz. He shouldn't be working in Holyoke. And we can see that time and time again with officers who get themselves in bind. People with knees on the neck of people in Minneapolis were disciplined 19 times and were still working there. That's not a department that has an accredited policy. So force, for instance, it was not best practice. It was there, but we were concerned, for instance, we didn't find in the policy, even though the officers were wearing tasers, we didn't find any policy on that, on the use of the tasers or the reporting of the tasers. And then when we were talking to some of the staff members, there was an officer whose certification in instructing the taser had expired because they've been too busy to send him to training because he's working shifts. Or there wasn't enough money to send him to training. It really didn't matter, but he wasn't certified at the day that we were here, and it had expired, which then makes everybody else he's training not trained. And that's when you get into a risk management thing. If you're sending in a deposition, the lawyers would love to hear you say that. I'm sorry, we're not certified to do this, but we use it anyway. And then the policy that you had did not specify when force must cease. And that's a pretty important one. It's like, to go back to George Floyd, when should have force ceased? When they had him in handcuffs, put him in the back of the car. Not for, however minutes it was he was on the ground. There should be a policy that says that. How many times are you shooting a person? Is it too many? When must force cease should be written and articulated and trained in a policy and talked about. Did you want to add to that? Any questions on that? Because we found this important. I mean,
Appreciate you guys going through the process.
Next slide. Hopefully it's Michael's. Mike, that is Michael. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. I get the distinction of following David, and I want you to know that even though his parents told him that if everybody else is jumping in the Saugus River, you don't have to, he did.
On my head a few times.
Yeah. By way of my bona fides, I grew up in New Bedford, Mass., and it was the Acushnet River, not the Saugus River. And I get the enviable task to talk about something really sexy, and that's evidence control. And I'm sure you all know from watching TV and movies how important it is when it comes to collecting evidence. But just as important to a police department is how you retain and keep that evidence. The nature of the evidence alone, it can be something incredibly valuable, cash, jewelry, vehicles, guns, weapons, perishable, blood-stained pieces of evidence. All of it can be critical to a successful prosecution. So one of the first things we did was look at the department's policies, and we did find that they have a suite of comprehensive policies governing evidence collection and evidence control and property management. Some of it was difficult to follow. Some of it almost gave you the impression that the policy had been adopted, say, perhaps from another department, but not fully tailored to the Holyoke Police Department. A couple of them would talk about the property division and the evidence division, sometimes interchangeably, sometimes in the same paragraph. So we recommend that the policies be revisited and also be revised. The other thing that we were concerned about was the department seems to have developed over time, which is an unusual, a hybrid tracking system for evidence. So they have IMC, which is a software suite, and they're currently using IMC to track evidence when it comes into the police department. I believe they told us it was adopted in the year 2000. But any evidence prior to that has not been inputted into the system. Evidence going back as far as 1980s are on a paper-based system. And they're also using paper to continue to track some of the evidence that comes into the department, even though they're entering it into the IMC software. It's just a messy way to do that. We asked for if there was a comprehensive log of all the evidence that the department has, and they couldn't provide it. We asked for the total number of pieces of evidence, and we were told because of the way that the evidence is tracked, that without doing a fair amount of research, which we didn't want them to spend 72 hours delving into how many pieces of property they have, that they couldn't give us that number, which would be a number that is easily generated through a software program like IMC. Like I said, it's just messy. It can be prone to errors. It's inefficient in that if you use a software program, you can set up tickler dates to go and revisit that evidence to see if it needs to be purged. You can do it by the type of evidence. So if it's evidence for a district court case, which typically district court cases flow through the criminal justice system a little faster than a felony case, you can set it up to take a look at it 6 months, 4 months. A felony case, you can do 9 months or 12 months, so that you're ensuring that you purge that evidence, and get it out of the system, and hopefully, in some cases, justifiably return it to the owner. It's also risky, and then I think that it opens up the opportunity of actually losing items. And I think that we talked about that it could jeopardize the chain of custody in a case as well. And I think that I do want to say that in talking to the Holyoke evidence officers, they're doing a heck of a job. I mean, it's not an easy job. The department takes in a tremendous amount of evidence, and they're doing a Herculean job in keeping track of it and trying to continue to purge it so that they have room in the evidence room. That said, and again, the other thing with a software-based system, most departments the size of Holyoke right now have gone to a barcoding system. So when the evidence technician does the intake on the piece of evidence, the software generates a barcode sticker, and they can slap that right on the evidence, and that tracks the evidence from when it comes in to when it goes back out the door. And not the Holyoke Police Department, I'm not saying they're doing this, but I once saw a police department that was using Post-it notes to put on the evidence, and one day the evidence technician went into the evidence room, and because of the humidity, there was a collection of Post-it notes on the floor that he or she ended up having to match up to the evidence sitting on the shelves. And like I said, the evidence room right now is busting out at the seams. Part of it is due to the shelving system that they have there. Again, the department the size of Holyoke would have a modular shelving system, similar to what you might see in your doctor's office, how they can move and shift, and you can also configure the shelves as well. Right now, it's just a one-size-fits-all, so pieces of evidence are just being crammed together. Small pieces of evidence are taking up valuable space that could be used for larger pieces of evidence. So one of the things we recommended was that the department look at a shelving system, and the evidence officers have actually told me that they have looked at these systems in the past, but they can be expensive. Miss anything?
I might add that when in my review of positions that could be civilianized, this is another one of them. There's a host of police agencies that have oversight by a sworn sergeant or a sworn officer who might be a sergeant rank, but then they have a host of civilians working for them doing evidence retention. Here you have a number of officers who are in there doing it, and in MRI's opinion, that warrants being reviewed.
And the other thing I might add is, talking to the evidence technician, is he had not had the opportunity to go to any type of training within years, and that's something also the department should take a look at any point in time. Next slide. Fiscal management. So one of the things we looked at was the budgeting system, and also we took a quick look at the payroll system. And citywide, I guess you're currently still using a paper-based payroll system. So supervisors are entering hourly information onto timesheets. Timesheets are going up to a payroll person. That person is sending those timesheets over to City Hall, and somebody is inputting that system into a computer program. It's work-intensive, it's redundant, it's ineffective, it's prone to mistakes. It makes it difficult to generate reports for decision makers to use, and also has a negative effect on your internal controls in monitoring your payroll system. Again, most cities the size of Holyoke are using a software payroll system. We were told when we talked to the city auditor that that's something that she has been looking at, and we would encourage the city to move in that direction. Let's see. Supplemental budget request. So one of the things that we thought was unusual was the number of transfers that occur at the end of year. And that may just be Holyoke's way of budgeting, but for us, that was rather unusual. We don't normally see that in a lot of cities and towns. It makes it very difficult to do apples-to-apples comparison from year to year when you're looking at the budget. But also, when you look at that combined with the supplemental request that the department made, it also calls into question as to how the budget is being initially funded. Are those line items being funded at a level that they hopefully should be funded at? And for example, the overtime budget for the last 3 years was, I believe, intentionally and woefully underfunded for years and years. And we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, which makes me wonder, as a former police chief, town manager, somebody responsible for monitoring and administering budget. It makes it, I think, difficult for your police chief to administer that budget, knowing that his or her overtime account is so pathetically, woefully underfunded, not being guaranteed that he or she is going to get a supplemental at the end of the year. I would go into that type of environment saying, no, we're going to hold off on these purchases even though they're authorized. No, we're going to hold off on this overtime even though it's authorized. Because I have to make sure I got to get to the end of the fiscal year. So one of the things we suggested was that the city or the department look at how they're doing their budgeting process. We're also surprised to learn about the grants, and we don't have a real clear answer for you on this one. During our interviews, we were told by both elected and appointed officials that the police department, and supposedly other departments within the city, I might add, had overexpended their grants by, again, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it had been done repeatedly for the last 3 years, which the city had stepped in and funded that deficit, which in some ways is a supplemental budget, I guess, so to speak. But when we talked to the police department, they told us no, that was not an accurate statement, that the grants were not overexpended. It was a matter of the timing of the reimbursements. We're not an auditing firm, so we didn't do a deep dive into this, but we suggested that the town have its auditing firm take a look at this and see what's going on, especially if it's not just one department, if other departments have done this in the past, because that's That's a problem. And there are a lot of guidelines in terms of how you apply for and administer grants that are out there already. The GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, has a ton of information that's out there, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. So that was one of our suggestions as well. Next slide. The capital improvement. We talked about this earlier, I believe. We believe that the internal video system at the department, and we understand, or at least at the time of this report, we were told that it was in the process of being replaced. But we believe that's a real high-risk area for the department right now. That and its security swipe card system are literally essential to the department. The systems that they have now are old, they're antiquated. For example, the surveillance system in the booking area, the cell block area, a lot of the cameras don't work. The monitors where the officers, the station officer and the dispatchers are supposed to monitor, they can't monitor because they're not functioning. They don't record anymore because apparently they don't have the parts for the system, and they can't get the parts because the system is so old, so they can't even record, if they could, what was going on in the cell block. The door to the cell block is temperamental, so that in the event of emergency, if the station officer had to even get into the cell block to help out an officer, the door didn't open all the time. They had to repeatedly try and attempt to get the door to open. The panic alarm in the cell block didn't work, so in the event that an officer, he or she, was struggling with a prisoner or thought that there was going to be a problem, if they hit the panic alarm, it wasn't working. And then, the department has a policy in place that states that prisoners will be monitored. Every 15 minutes, the station officer or house officer will go and check the prisoner. He or she is required to use their swipe card and swipe in the cell block area as a way of recording that the prisoner is being monitored. That system was broken as well and not working. These are all high-risk areas for not just for the police department, but for the city as well. And then the other area we looked at had to do with the department-owned property. Again, the department had a great policy in place, but it just was not being followed. The property that is coming into the department, being purchased, is not being inventoried. It's not being audited by policy. Policy states that I think items over $250 and with a shelf life of over 3 years. And then it identifies other pieces of property, such as firearms, will be inventoried and they'll be audited, and the division commanders are required to file reports. It's our understanding that that is not being done, or at least not being done consistently. We were happy to hear that the department had purchased a barcode system, though, for property control, and they were going to be rolling it out for their computers, so we're recommending that they roll it out for all the department equipment that they purchase. I think that's it for me. Are there any questions? Oh, wait, we're holding questions. Dave, you were going to do internal affairs?
Internal affairs, so I'm back to Dave again. Again, there was some inconsistencies where if someone came into the department to complain about an officer's actions, that by their policy, it indicated that if you didn't sign the complaint, that it wouldn't be investigated. That is against best practices. It's against accredited practices. All investigations, anonymous, not signed, you need to review those investigations. Now, it makes it complicated because you may not be able to follow up with anybody, but you have to exhaust it and find out. That's best practice by law. And so that was, to me, that's a high-level problem area that was noted by me. And again, this is from my background as being an assessor for CALEA, where I would go in departments and look at these things to see if they were doing them and if they were in compliance with doing them. And clearly, it's a best practice that isn't being followed here. So we recommend that be adjusted so that all complaints against officers, signed or not, or anonymous or not, are investigated to their full extent.
So you've heard us talking often this evening about the benefits of accreditation and complying with industry standards and best practices. We're here as a third party. We don't have a dog in the fight. The outcome is what it is. The thing with accreditation is that's exactly the same thing. They're a third-party organization, whether it's through the Commonwealth's Police Accreditation Program or through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which is a national-based, international-based accreditation program. It's a third party that doesn't have a dog in the fight, that comes to Holyoke either virtually or every fourth year physically, and reviews policies, procedures, rules, and regulations to make sure that they meet contemporary standards and expectations of our profession. And not just the policy itself or the written directive itself, but actually the practice of the Holyoke Police Department in this instance, to make sure, as we've discovered and reported to you, that these things are being applied in practice consistently, so you're able to better manage your risk. The thing with an accreditation program is you don't have an opportunity to put your organization's written directives and practices on the back burner. It may be that, and particularly as Dave was describing for you earlier, with how incredibly busy the Holyoke Police Department is, and the limitations of availability of officers to deal with the high volume of calls for service, that back burner becomes very attractive. But the thing with accreditation is that you don't get the back burner as an option. You have to keep it up. You always have to go after your policy reviews. There are certain policies, these high-risk policies that we talked about, that always require review. That doesn't mean that they have to be revised, but as Dave talked about earlier, some of the deficiencies in the use of force policies would have been discovered right away, because use of force is supposed to be reviewed annually to make sure that it's contemporary. Search and seizure, harassment, sexual harassment, bias, evidence, anything that is the very purpose of our being here, this high-risk areas of liability for the city, are the areas that must be reviewed annually to make sure that they are first, the written directives are contemporary, and then the department is following up. The Commonwealth has a system where they come in every couple of years and they they pick up the edges of the carpet and they look around and make sure that things are the way they're supposed to be. CALEA comes in virtually once every year for 3 years, and then sends a team to come physically and lift up the corners of those carpets. So there's always the presence of that person or that organization looking over the shoulder of the Holyoke Police Department. Now, the benefit of that is that this is a high-risk business. There is a high probability, or at least some probability, that you're going to be sued. As I said before, you can indict a ham sandwich just about any day, and similarly, you can sue a police department just about any day. Whether you're able to defend yourself against that is the critical piece. And when you're sitting as the chief of police in the United States District Court defending a claim against the city, it's great testimony to be able to say that our policies have been reviewed by somebody else, and they have been found to be in compliance with the industry standards and best practices. And in practice, we've proven over the last 3-4 years, whatever the case may be, that we are actually doing this in practice as a matter of routine. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't necessarily be successfully sued, but it will mitigate the risk. So instead of it being a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, it might be $1 million. I mean, that's kind of a fine line to look at, but any time that you're able to reduce the liability, the financial risk that the city is facing, simply by having accredited standards and demonstration of compliance with those standards is outstanding. It's incredibly helpful. It also gives Chief Pratt and his successors the tools needed to hold individuals, units, and the organization accountable. It's also one of those things where, for us as practitioners at this level, we talk about transparency and accountability as a matter of routine. And you'd think, well, isn't that what everybody does? Well, no, that's not the case. But accredited agencies are required to. The reports that Dave was talking about earlier on use of force, annual reviews on bias, annual reviews on constitutional requirements, annual reviews of evidence. All of those things are publicly accessible documents and should be shared with the community. And that's a part of being an accredited agency. One of the things that, and I'll tell you that I cannot say with absolute certainty, this is observation of media and social media over the last several years, particularly after, as Dave described, the understandable outcry after George Floyd, is that accredited police departments were not the agencies that were exposed on the front page above the fold. It's just as simple as that. It was accredited police departments are able to demonstrate to their communities and put that trust in the bank that they're doing things right. As we have said over and over and over again, you're going to hear it again and again and again from us, we recommend that the Holyoke Police Department pursue accreditation.
Can I follow that up, Sean, with two things? When there's almost a selling aspect of this to you. Again, we leave here and you do what you want with the report. But in my agency, when I was trying to convince the council that they needed to expend funds to do this, and there are costs associated with this. Chief Pratt is going to need a civilian person to assist in getting this department accredited and then getting the reports. But I was pointing out to my city council that would you send your child and your money to a non-accredited university? Would you have your heart surgery done in a non-accredited hospital? But yet you give power and authority to take away freedoms and liberties and in certain confined circumstances to utilize deadly force. You're not requiring them to be accredited. There's such a thing called as early warning system, where it's required that each officer essentially is evaluated through an early warning program. They're analyzed essentially. Are they utilizing too much sick leave? Are they utilizing too much force? Are they utilizing too many citizens' complaints? All these things pop up, and the cumulative totalitativeness of that is that you find problem officers who, generally speaking, are like a very small number in your department, but are the very high number of the complaints. You locate them. So there's things that are required that are in there. It is hard work, but as Sean points out, we think it would address many of your concerns or the concerns that we located within the in the report. Too much preaching.
Okay, so we've touched on many of these, but this kind of summarizes some of the challenges we foresee facing the Holyoke Police Department in the immediacy and in the foreseeable future. As was discussed earlier, the thing with collective bargaining, this isn't the cops' fault. This isn't the union's fault. This isn't the city's fault. This is the result of the collective work of your employees and your elected officials at a time when that was the best decision that they could make at the time. So now, here we are in 2023 looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? That has yet to be answered, Mayor. The structured maintenance plan, you heard it now from both Dave and from Mike, and I reiterate, when you're buying something, when you're making a capital investment, the minimal investment that goes along with that for maintaining a valuable piece of equipment or capital structure just makes sense. You know, extending the life of something that you've spent a lot of money on just makes sense. Civil service, this is not an observation that we are making uniquely or independently. This is something that is being questioned throughout the Commonwealth, and in many communities, it's being voted out altogether. The nice thing is that the police officers and staff that may be enjoying civil service protections today for the period of their employment, if the city actually went forward with eliminating civil service, they would still be covered. They'd be grandfathered under civil service. So nobody's giving anything up. The self-insured liability. We kind of looked at each other like, what? The idea of self-insured liability just seems wild, particularly after we've had this look. And you're insuring yourselves right now against something that is it's going to happen at some point here. So consider that. Talk to your financial advisors or whomever, and reconsider being self-insured. That's up to you guys. The organizational structure. Dave talked about that at length. Mike touched on it as well, and we think that a lot of these things that are inherent to this unusual use of police officers for jobs that could be otherwise performed by somebody that has not gone through a police academy and has been extensively trained as a police officer will enable the department to run more effectively as an organization, and that's part of that. The training piece, the nice thing about, we do this a lot, and there are many instances when we get pushback from the chief of police or their command staff, any number of people. We're training people. We think that foundational training, subsequent training, your ongoing mastery of the profession of policing is critically important. So does Dave Pratt. We've had that conversation, and I'm very comfortable telling you that he's doing what he can with what he can. And I think that organizationally, I don't mean just the police department, but the city needs to look at how its police officers are trained for a successful career. Not just the police academy, maybe not just the FTO program, which is critical, but over the lifetime of a police officer, they must, as Dave talked about, every time they get promoted, every time they get a specialized assignment, they have to be trained appropriately for that position. It's critical to the success of the community. Okay, so there were three things that we found were, if you had to come up with this list, where are the critical areas that we're looking at? So physical safety of the community and staff. Well, what does that mean? Mike talked about your booking room, the swipe card systems, things like HVAC system. Well, what's the HVAC have to do with safety? Well, it certainly has something to do with the health and safety of your employees if the HVAC system is underperforming. What is your financial exposure? How are you going to deal with the budget things that Mike brought up and the liability that the city has with respect to the policies, procedures, rules, and regulations, and proof of compliance with them in practice? And reputational risk. The one thing that Dave brought up earlier, and I'll tell you what, we were very impressed by this. These officers are intensely proud of being Holyoke police officers. Generally speaking, police officers, as a profession, they're pretty proud of themselves as men and women that are serving their communities as police officers. These Holyoke police officers, I can't say it's unique, but man, I'll tell you what, it's really close. That the level of commitment that they have to this city is truly, truly impressive. And right now, they enjoy, when they do get a chance to go out of town for training, telling their peers that they are Holyoke police officers. But how long is that going to last? How long is their reputation going to remain intact if changes to the way these things that we've discussed tonight are made? How long is the reputation of the community going to be sustainable? When are people going to be making decisions about whether they move into or move out of Holyoke based on the reputation of the police department? Well, what does that mean, Sean? Well, the police department, this beautiful building, is physical evidence of the government's authority here in the city. But the thing is, typically, the average resident here or citizen that comes to do business or come to work here, they don't come to City Hall, but I'll bet you they see a police officer just about every single day. Police are the most visible evidence of your government, and it is an imperative that your police department is operating at a high level to represent this community in a way that people are proud of, and that the reputation of the city is sustained over time. There's a soapbox someplace, and I'm stepping on it. All right. So in our report, we gave you a fairly extensive list of recommendations, and they're there for your consideration. What you prioritize is your business. We think, however, that if you had to do three things that would enable your ability to look at these recommendations in a meaningful way, in that transparent and held accountable way with your community, these three things are important. A strategic plan. Getting your community together, the key stakeholders, to take a look at this report and not merely reading through it and nodding your head and saying, yeah, this is really important. Put it in place. Say these are the things we're going to do this year, next year, over the next 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. That and measuring, putting in tools to measure the success, making sure that you're sticking with the plan, making adjustments as the external influences occur. Very important. Communications plan. That's not just, what's that? That's everything when it comes to communicating to the community, internally with the police department, teaching the officers and staff how they should be interacting with the community to provide them information they need, to withdraw from the community the information that the police department needs, and then turning that around for counselors like yourself to operationalize through with the assistance and direction of the mayor. And wait a minute, there it is again, accreditation. There's a dead horse here too. This is important. These three things. If you do these three things, the rest of those recommendations can fall under the umbrella of those three things, and you can start to forecast the next 1, 10, 20 years of the police department's risk management. There you go. Before I open that floor, Councilor, Dave, is there anything you have last-minute comments? Mike? No. Okay. Councilors, please.
First of all, let me thank you all for the presentations. Very well put together, insightful, educational, and fun. at the same time. A little bit of everything. Yeah, keeps us awake, keeps it intensive for the people on TV, for the people that watch it on YouTube in the future, and the people that report it on the news. But I have a lot of questions, but I'll wait, and I'll allow everyone else. Well, first the committee members, if they have any questions, and then any other counselors, and then I'll go. So, any other committee? We ain't got that much time, though.
I asked my question earlier.
Okay.
And I think I got an answer to
Todd?
that.
Jose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll go. I don't know where to start. I don't really have a lot of questions. I think reading this report, I think a lot of the things that it was said earlier, you know, low staff, lack of funding, that's, you can insert whichever department as a title and then put those complaints under that, and it can be any city department in the city of Holyoke. So that is, you know, something that we should definitely look at. I mean, I think my personal thing with this report, you know, I was named as a threat to the Holyoke Police Department. I was the counselor that made the gang comment 5-6 months ago, and it had to do with around ShotSpotter. It had to do with giving a sort of a lens that's not usually seen in these spaces. And in response to that, there was a whole 2 press conferences, not 1, 2 press conferences, level intimidation. It's people that are meant to protect and serve asking a elected official to be silenced. Technically, if I followed any one of those 2 sort of suggestions, I wouldn't even be speaking on this topic right now. And luckily, we're still here, still talking about it. Thinking of like some of the things that were brought up today is literally a reason why I was saying no to this new technology. You know, we are sending people out, and we are going to, I'm talking about the ShotSpotter technology, sending people out now to respond to different shots, but we don't have a use of force policy. We don't have a taser policy. The instructor's not certified. When force must cease policy needed, doesn't exist. Then, if we do find something, some sort of evidence, we have a whole mess in the evidence in department within the city, within Holyoke, within the police department. Then that paired with having officers working overtime, sleeping. There have been people saying, hey, I see this officer sleeping. Understandably so, they're working a lot of freaking hours doing a lot of things that we said, hey, they should not be doing. So when I look at this, the way I see this is I want to thank MRI for doing this report. And I hope that the police department is realizing that we are trying to make things better for Holyoke. I think in the 1.5 years that we've been here, we have not said no to any sort of requests for transfer requests. We have not said, we have not cut. We can't add anything to the mayor's budget. I don't think we ended up cutting anything. So the city council is here trying to make things better for every single department. So to be named a threat is frustrating. It's really frustrating. I understand that comment didn't land very well to some people, but again, it was a lens. It was a reality of how the police can be perceived. And with the reality that we have not all these policies, we're not even training people when we send them into the field. There's no actual field training. What do you think the perception is going to be of the police department? But no, in the response to that, so I mean, one of the recommendations here that we do a comprehensive communications plan. First, I mean, I'll never forget those 2 weeks in my city council. Those were the probably worst 2 weeks of my city council. This is my first year. We'll see if there's a second term. but that showed me that you can do a community, you can communicate to the public of what's going on within a department. See, let's have more of that. You know, let's have a more press conferences, not about trying to silence a community member and elected official, but about what's actually happening in our community. We have ShotSpotter installed, and no, that's not even said. We have a 24/7 mics in downtown, and that couldn't even be press conference out to the community. This is a problem that we have here. All I want to say, I know this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I don't necessarily have questions because I think a lot of what's on here, it's like, yeah, duh. Of course, they need to do this. They should be doing that. And I hope that we work on making these things better before we try to add other things that clearly we're not ready to be adding. So that's I'll leave my thoughts now. I think based on if other counselors say something else, I'm sure some other things will pop up, but I just wanted to sort of say that. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Tessa Murphy-Romboletti.
Thank you. Again, just wanted to thank everyone for coming in. I have a few questions. And again, just with everything that I'm experiencing in City Council, I need to adjust my expectations because I think I was expecting a lot different of an audit. This was actually characterized now as risk review. From the report, it doesn't really feel like the audit that we were being told we were going to get, and that's not necessarily. I mean, you guys did, I suppose, what was asked. I guess I just was hoping that, and again, I'm going to keep adjusting my expectations of what I think is going to happen because it's not really how it works out in City Council. But like, I thought that we were going to get some answers on. I feel like we've been talking about a lot of some of the things that were brought up, and I know you mentioned that, Mayor, in your narrative or summary to us. We have talked about a lot of these things, and I guess I was a little disappointed that we didn't, like, we know that there's a problem with overtime, but I guess I was hoping for some recommendations on like how to improve the way that we track overtime, but perhaps it sounds like this is the first step in a lot of assessing. So that's just my initial thought after reading this. I do have a question, and I would love to know how city councilors were selected to be interviewed.
That is a question for the mayor, or?
So you want me to go? Yeah, so the MRI reached out about connecting with counselors during the process. There was no number that they were requesting. They're just asking for counselors that were interested in being selected. I reached out to the council president to see what he wanted to do since it's his council body. I suggested to the council that we pick to the council president that we select a select few. Considering that there's 13 members and figuring out how to scheduling and whatnot would be a little difficult. And so it was just kind of a consensus, but I let the council president determine which of those counselors were going to be. And yeah, I mean, I don't talk.
May I? Yep. So when the mayor reached out, he said MRI would be here for a select time frame, of which we need some people to sit with them, mostly during the daytime, during the scheduling that they had, and to see if, one, could I make it? I said, absolutely, I'll make time for it. And then two, who else could we possibly fit into there, based on the scheduling? And I said a few names. I mean, wasn't really picking and choosing anyone I thought would be better or worse. It was more of just thinking off the cuff. So said a few names, of which, kind of left it open to MRI as well, as if they wanted to reach out to more. So here are a few names that if that helps you, if you want to do more, that was for them to say, okay, we did 3 or 4, but we'd like to do all 13. We'd like to do 9, So that was left open.
Thank you. I'm not going to blame anyone, but I think it was a really missed opportunity to not interview every single counselor who's on this body, because we were mentioned significantly as a body, and I think it's really unfortunate that we weren't all given the opportunity to interview, because, I mean, me personally, some of my colleagues joke that I'm the moderate on the city council, and I consider myself someone who, I mean, even if it wasn't me, I think a variety of opinions, and quite frankly, I mean, we were given a lot of, we were considered a threat many times in this report, and so I just think it was a missed opportunity that we weren't all included on this, or that there wasn't some kind of a more straightforward way to do that. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. My next question, the whole paper payroll thing really kind of threw me for a loop. I actually used to work at City Hall for about 5 years, and it's not my understanding that the entire city is functioning on paper payroll systems. So I'm just curious, what was the process that was used to identify issues within the payroll system and our financial system in general, and who outside of Holyoke Police Department was interviewed and consulted on our internal processes?
So we met with the city auditor and also another member of her staff. I don't know off the top of my head who that was, and that's who we talked to about the payroll system as well as other financial matters and internal controls.
Okay.
In terms of other people outside of the city, I'm not sure what you...
Oh, not outside of the city. I meant the police department, outside of the police department. So the auditor...
The woman who does payroll, she sits in the office by herself, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Police department.
At the police department.
At the police department. I'm wondering if anyone, the treasurer's office, the tax collector's office was...
No. We
Okay.
talked to the city auditor.
Okay.
Like I said, a member of her staff, and the civilian staff at the police department.
Okay.
Those were the three key.
It was our understanding that the woman at the police department literally wrote things down in pencil.
Right. So when we were asking about that with the city auditor,
sure,
they mentioned that it wasn't just the police department, that it was pretty much citywide. That's how we got that impression.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
I mean, if that's not accurate, then I apologize.
No, that's okay. My understanding, I thought we used Munis a little more than that, but I'm just...
Oh yeah, we're not using Munis to its full capability, which is to the point you was making, that's an overhaul. We're actively working on upgrading the whole system so that we
Okay.
can maximize the use.
Okay.
And
including
that was mentioned
payroll.
as well.
Okay.
the City auditor.
Thank you. Another question I have, I do believe that surveys and responses are super important tools in data collection, and it's good to see that that was done thoroughly. But it does seem to me in this report, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that these individual anecdotal responses were given the same kind of weight as any kind of aggregated data. And I'm just curious, was there a thought process behind that? Is that typical? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I own that section, so I'm responsible for it. It's when we met, we were hoping we would get most, if not all, of the department that would participate with the SWAT. And I think one of you gentlemen may have raised the issue that there were people who had worked, they're sleeping, they can't be here. Can we put together a survey? And kind of get into the business world, that cost us something out of the contract that we hadn't really anticipated, but we also saw the importance of doing so we did it. I'm not trying to be like, aren't we wonderful, but that's how we did that. And frankly, we're then disappointed that only a third of the people who were eligible for it, that got the email, the survey, actually even did it. We were saddened by that. Some of the anecdotal stuff was entirely my inserting what I thought was an interesting statement that was said. I own that.
That's all right. Thank you. Just trying to better understand. I think, one of my last questions will just be like, and I don't know who this is for. It might not be for you. It might be for the mayor or the chief. Or there's a lot of recommendations about drafting new policies, and I'm just curious, like, how do those policies get drafted? Who's drafting them, and what does that process look like? Is it the police department? Is it a third party? What do you envision that process looking like? I guess it's up to, I don't know.
Yes.
Good answer.
Great. I'm done.
Yep. It's entirely at your discretion. There are third-party companies that will work with the Holyoke Police Department to develop policies compliant with industry standards and best practices if that is something that you are financially prepared to take on. There are plenty of agencies throughout New England, certainly throughout the Commonwealth, that could provide model written directives to Chief Pratt. And then the burden becomes making sure that the East Overshoe model policy is uniquely crafted to meet the needs and expectations of the city of Holyoke. Thirdly, and let me just comment a little bit further. As a good friend of mine has said many times, plagiarism is alive and well in police work. There is no reason not to find model policies that have been put into place and measured against best practices and industry standards by either the MassPAC accreditation system or the CALIA accreditation system. They're available. There's no reason to reinvent that wheel. But again, the criticality being that they are then modified to be unique to the needs of this city. Okay, and then thirdly, if Chief Pratt is looking for a reason to retire early, he could start to write them himself fresh, which is of course a sign of insanity and should cause the city some concern. There's no reason not to find models from someplace else.
Thank you. Another sign of insanity is running for city council. So, I mean, I get it.
Stop it.
I have another
Running for city
Or mayor.
council the second time.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I just pulled papers a few weeks ago, so there you go. I do have one more question. Actually, something that I learned from this is that I don't think I really realized that any kind of training that gets paid through overtime. Is that correct? Any kind of training.
Well, Chief Pratt could answer this probably better, but if they're on duty, obviously you're not already, then you're not paying for them. But if you're on the night shift, midnight shift, weekends, you're paying.
Right. Okay.
Correct. Or those officers are granted what we call permission days to go to the training, and now there's a vacancy on the shift, which in these times would cause overtime.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's really my only question. The only thing I'd just say is, I didn't agree with Councilor Maldonado's statement. I didn't say it, but like, I appreciate that we're having this conversation. And I also feel like after reading, I don't know if the public read this top to bottom. I know a lot of us did. I mean, there's reasons why we ask questions. And I think the fact that some of us get called a threat because we ask questions or we, hold the police department to a high standard like we hold all other departments in the city. Like, I just feel like I really hope that this exercise in looking at the gaps and the things that we need to improve can show that like even the police department needs to be improved, and that doesn't mean that if you're trying to hold someone accountable. That doesn't mean you don't respect the police. It doesn't mean you don't respect the work that they're doing. It's just we have to ask these questions, and we have to ask tough questions. So, you know, I feel like I want to emphasize that for people, because I'm not coming in here thinking all of you don't like the police. I mean, half of you are former law enforcement. So, like, I can't help but not say that. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Mayor, for doing this, and the Chief, and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy-Romboletti. Well said. Councilor Vacan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess my questions, any that I might have had, have been well covered tonight. And so I would just like to highlight, I guess, my takeaways. My hope is that this report will be used first and foremost to take what I call the low-hanging fruit and fix that right away. And to me, low-hanging fruit is policies that are missing or incomplete. I know they're readily available, and that we can bring those into line so that we can have that kind of a gap readily filled. Personally, I'm a big fan of accreditation in general. I've led a number of healthcare organizations in accreditation. Having said that, there is definitely an added cost involved, but it definitely, when done in the full spirit of accreditation, is a quality-oriented driver for an organization. It does depend upon the top leadership in the organization being wholeheartedly engaged and behind it. One of the very most concerning things for me out of the report was the fact that essentially, and I know there were caveats in terms of the numbers, I compared Holyoke to our sister city of Chicopee, and I think in some ways they're comparable, in other ways not exactly. The stunner to me was the number of 60 patrol officers compared to 120. And I think as long as we have all these specialty jobs that contribute to forced overtime, a perception of favoritism with how these specialized jobs get given out, I think until we can straighten out those contracts and get us more in alignment with some of the other comparisons that we see, I think we're going to have a hard time moving off the current dime that we're on. I'm hearing loud and clear from your report, which I think on a broad brush is very good, to the point of one other counselor. No, you didn't get into all the depths of the fixes, but you know, that's not within the ability of this kind of a report. But internally, we have the tools that we need to use. Your comments relative to payroll are a highly frustrating comment to me. We have had comment after comment for 10 years. And 10 years ago, we were 10 or 20 years behind the times with paper payroll. And we had a mayor who didn't push it, and we had department heads who didn't want to do it. And so I have to say to our current mayor, Mayor Garcia, bless your heart, because it's time to drag us into current events. And that will streamline a lot of other things within the department once we fully use the Munis system, which is very good, but it's only as good as you use it. And so I'm very encouraged, Mayor Garcia, by your commitment to using it. So I won't go on and on, because I mean, we could talk for a long time about this report, but those pieces of low-hanging fruit, I think, would go a long way. I think the gaps that have been found are no reason to hold back on following other good initiatives like the Shot Spotter, which appeared to have functioned as advertised recently in our city. And I think that's an enhancement to our safety. But I do agree that we should definitely have a robust policy on the use of force and those other current standards, and that, you know, we want to be on top of that. But I thank everybody involved in this study. I do wish our patrol folks had participated more thoroughly. Maybe they're waiting to see some things happen and then the engagement will become a little bit higher. But overall, it is my hope that my fellow city councilors will use this audit as a reason to support initiatives to improve the department, and not for reasons to say why the department should not move forward on other initiatives, because I think our opportunity here is to really make things better, and that is the spirit I hope that we all bring to this endeavor. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Recognize Councilor Givner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, my ears are popping. So I was traveling recently, and the captain, or the pilot of the plane, had on a lanyard that said, fatigued and undervalued. And I thought that was interesting because I immediately thought about this meeting tonight and our police department and how they must often feel. I hear a lot about the underfunding, but I think this audit brings up a lot of interesting factoids and information about management, budgeting, the union contracts, and morale. I was especially interested in the morale portion and the union contract. I feel like there seemed to be a lot of items in the surveys of low morale on the police force, and I think that's unfortunate. I can imagine it. If you're tired, your morale is low, but I hate to think that they feel unappreciated. So I do think it was great that Councilor Murphy-Romboletti mentioned that, you know, just because we're a little critical and have a lot of questions doesn't mean we don't appreciate the police force. We obviously realize how vital the service is in our community. I am curious, and I'm not sure that this will necessarily be answered right away, but I am curious to understand our union contract better, to understand what kind of items are in there that can be changed. I hate to think that there are a lot of things in this report that we can't change anyway, so we might be fighting an uphill battle. So I think a great way to start looking at some of the items that we really care to change, as far as you know, creating more civilian positions if possible, that would make things, you know, make it a little less expensive for the police department to function, and also take some of the tasks that are not necessarily police tasks away from police officers, so they can do different types of work, would be helpful. But I definitely am more interested in understanding the contract and, you know, how we can be helpful in shifting things, changing things, so that our community has, you know, a police force that's not fatigued and undervalued all the time. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Councilor Givner. For me, I have a variety, or a myriad of questions, right? But I'm not going to ask them all, because some people need to go home, especially you guys. I want to thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the report. One of the things when I first read the report that stood out to me was the SWOT analysis, like mentioned before. I'm not going to go deep into it because I don't want to entertain it, and I don't want to give any entertainment to the people that want to address elected officials as threats. But it touched my heart in the beginning, right? Because I'm harmless. Literally harmless. And it made me think, like, why would I be considered a threat? And some of the other counselors. And I think for me, the only thing I've done since I've gotten out of prison about 10 years ago is good. So that is, I guess that's why I'd be considered a threat, right? Somebody with a criminal record that is succeeding and continuing to do things positive in a positive way, that could be a threat to someone that feels like it's infringing on their rights, or their money, or moolah, for lack of better terms. But anyways, I think for me, you mentioned something about the budget being like 12.5 mil this year, but it didn't include how much money they got in grants at the same time, right? I think that's another 13 mil, possibly, right? On top with grants? Or do we not know right now?
I couldn't tell you right
Okay.
off the top of my head. But I
So
don't think it's-
that would bring the total
Oh.
budget up to like almost 20 mil or a little more than that. But that's just a point that like maybe you guys didn't get to because you guys mentioned that later on about grants, that you guys didn't really get to get in that deep. But that is a point to me where it's, you mentioned that could, I mean, the fact that we got 12.5 million mitigates or prevents us from putting out more officers on the streets. But technically, if we got another almost 13 million in grants, and that could be wrong, but it's close to it, I believe, that could help put actual officers on the streets. But
Well,
it didn't get really looked at, so.
We're fully aware that, I mean, we were focusing on the city allocated authorized budget as by the council. Generally speaking, it's very rare, other than the rare COPS grant that comes out periodically where you are able to hire officers, but most grants are not designed to support personnel. Yes, maybe there's money that could be diverted elsewhere, but our focus was on the responsibility of the city to fund its police department.
No, I agree with you on that. I guess what I'm trying to point out is that like we fund that grant position at that beginning of the fiscal year to the full extent, right? Just in case the grant doesn't go all the way through. So at the end of the year, the expectation should be that we get kind of reimbursed some of the money, right? But that doesn't end up happening, which is why we cap at 250 for the overtime. It's not that we don't want to give it to you, it's that we want to, well, not you, to them, right? We just want to better understand the budget, right? What's happening? How are things being transferred in and out? And we gave them 250, and they're still being able to transfer and figure it out to this point. And they still haven't. I think they came back maybe one time to ask for more money. But at the end of the day, it's not that I don't want to vote yes to approving more money or any of that stuff. It's just that I don't feel confident in the way it's being managed now. And then adding more to it, that's just one of the pieces that kind of, for me.
Well, I hope that this report made it clear that Chief Pratt has no options.
No, I understand that piece too. I give him 110%.
Must use overtime.
No,
to
he
fill-
inherited this.
Yes.
He's only been the chief for about a year and a half.
Okay.
Been on the force for a long time, but the chief has the power. I thought Chief Scott would have done a lot of this back then. Then I think another point to me is the unbiased piece, right? I think I didn't have to be interviewed, right? It would have been cool if they interviewed the chair of public safety that actually went to prison and actually kind of has a different perspective on things. But I totally get why the bias piece, you want to exclude some of that. So, and again, this is
maybe
not
a Sean question, but I personally, we interviewed Councilor Givens and one other person, and then you came down, Mike, and interviewed two more. But candidly, we would have loved to have had all of you, but the impression to us was that you simply were busy and unavailable.
No worries, thank you. But it's not your fault. This is more of a us Holyoke thing that we got to kind of figure out and navigate amongst ourselves. How best to communicate with each other and how best to hold each other accountable and put each other up on these levels.
Communication somewhere.
I filed an order to create a communication commission. I got laughed at. But thank you guys for the report here, right? Thank you guys, because there's a lot of stuff coming out in this report that I've been bringing up for like my whole year that I've been on the council, and now it's I feel vindicated, right? Let me see. Hold on a second. So the report, although I don't feel like there was a different type of perspective included within the SWOT analysis, right? It did its job because you guys did your job. And, the fact that you guys did your job and it makes me feel comfortable, I appreciate that and thank you guys. It doesn't have to make everybody feel comfortable, but I feel comfortable. I think a point that stood out to me that was kind of depressing to me, and I apologize for this, is that when you guys, and in the report, it said that you guys went to say hi or something to some of the people, and they didn't really have like an attitude of like wanting to to address or even speak to you guys, and they kind of ignored and wrote you off. I understand the stress piece, and I understand all that piece, but that's unprofessional, 110%. I get stressed out. I'm here till 11, a lot of hours. I only get paid $9,999 a year for this. There are people making bank.
So you're saying, and I don't mean to talk more than I need, than I should, but was my personal piece, because my takeaway, personal takeaway was that they're tired.
I get that.
It wasn't anything about.
I love the piece that you guys put out there.
I don't know who you are. I'm not
No.
talking kind of thing. I mean,
Nope.
it's clear we were cop types that were in there, and it was.
No, I appreciate that, because I do believe they're tired, and the overtime speaks to it, right? The fact that we only have, what was it, 35, 36 officers out of the 60 actually working on actual duties, that speaks to the reasons why we have overtime all the time. And it kind of feels like we're never going to get out of it, even if we get our actual 92 officers, because when we get there, then we have to meet other goals too as well. So it continues the process. It's kind of like a cyclical process that is never ending. But I'm feeling like with this report, it at least allows a foundation for when we speak. It's not that we're speaking out of a bias or something that we don't like the police or something like that. I'm speaking from a foundation that was actually researched now. So I appreciate that piece. And it was kind of sad to hear that if given the opportunity to go somewhere else, 58% of the staff would leave, right? I don't think you'd find that opportunity somewhere else with regards to how much they're getting paid and vacation time and all the other stuff. So it kind of sucks that we have staff that don't want to be here but are here. So it kind of contradicts some of what you guys said, where like they like working for the Holyoke and they want to be here in Holyoke, but 58% don't want to be here in Holyoke. So that was something that stood out to me. That was kind of wild, to be honest. Go ahead, Chief.
I just have a comment, and possibly I'll be corrected on this, but that's 58% of the people polled, right?
Yes,
so
the
there
poll.
was only. So remember, 2/3 of the department didn't answer that question. So I'm not,
It was only 58% of the 33 people who were.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
So there's,
Okay.
2/3 more that weren't polled. That that number might not be as high as it appears in that survey.
That is true. So in a sense, what we're saying is that data is not trustworthy then.
I think that was mentioned in the
It
report
briefly,
that
yes.
you got to take that survey with a grain of salt, because it's not a big enough population that participated.
Not enough big
I
a
think
sample.
that
Yeah.
to explain some of that as well, I think some of the people that didn't participate in the survey possibly were people who participated in the SWAT. I mean, the survey was sort of thrown on at the end, like, hey, to catch those people we didn't get. And I think there may have been some confusion in the department that, well, I already participated in the SWAT, I don't need to do the survey too. Like, I've already said my piece, kind of thing. So that may have taken, I'm not saying it's the whole thing.
No, I
Certainly
agree with
people
you.
just didn't want to participate.
No, that's a small sample size.
But
It's true.
it's a small sample size. I think we have to look at that and just keep that in mind. That's all.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 110%. It was just kind of like something that was eye-opening to me.
I just want to add that the SWOT analysis, and to some extent the survey, is also we also do that to help inform us, to give us an idea as to what directions we might want to look at a little more deeply within the department. And like David said, it's anecdotal information. So thank you.
Thank you. I think for me, the other thing that you brought up that was very valuable was specialized assignments, and how much you guys put a chart of 34 specialized assignment positions. My mind is crazy right now, huh? When I'm interested in something, it's crazy. 34 positions. Did you guys get a salary breakdown of every single position so we could see how much of the budget is actually going into specialized assignments?
No, we did not.
If we could get that, Chief, that would be great. So I could send you the 34 chart thing.
I have it right here in front of me.
Okay, perfect.
Page 40.
All right. If we could get like the breakdown of, or just not even the salary.
The breakdown would be what they get per their contract union for the position as an officer or as a supervisor or whatever they're titled.
I know, but I want a number.
Right, so if they're a lieutenant and you got a lieutenant in a specialized role, he's getting paid what all lieutenants are getting paid. It's not,
I believe
not
this is
anything
just
different.
patrolman.
That's just patrolman.
So it'll be whatever the patrolman.
Specialized chart was just of the patrolman and specialized spots.
So can we?
So it'll be
list?
whatever the
Can we
patrolmans
still
get paid.
list? Can we get a list? I don't know.
Yeah, 34 times whatever a patrolman makes. There you go.
Okay. That's
Yeah, that
a
one's
list.
pretty straightforward.
I mean, we could certainly get a number. I'm just saying it's not complicated in the sense of.
I don't know how much a
for the most
patrolman
part.
makes.
Yeah.
What is it?
Again, it's going to come
Without
down
overtime?
to what exactly do you want? Just their base pay?
Just the base
what
pay.
their overtime is?
Just
what,
the base
you know,
pay without the overtime.
You know,
That's all.
I think an important part of this that should be clarified is if you go down this list, if you go to page 40 and look at those different positions, those are all positions that aren't necessarily 100% devoted to that. We have a lot of people doing multiple jobs. A lot of people doing things that are listed here as, you know, their job. Well, actually, grant management is on here, and that's not a patrolman's job. So, you know, some of these things have to be taken into account. Their detective bureau, well, some of those detective bureau are also doing other things as well. The fleet maintenance, that's a part-time job for we have you know, obviously a fleet mechanic from the DPW. We have a police officer who works in conjunction with that, but also does other tasks and other assignments. So, you know, it's to break down and say his salary is all for fleet maintenance isn't really accurate. So I can look into that more, but it's going to take some like really time and effort.
His time on task then. Just his time on task then. So if it's only a couple hours on task part-time, then whatever that is.
Yeah, it's just not that simple. It's not like I spend 2 hours a day on that task. It depends on the fleet. If the fleet's breaking down, he's going to spend more time on it. If he's got more important things to do in his other assignments, he does that. So
there's no actual system then.
That's what I'm saying to you.
Okay.
It's not as simple as he works 2 hours a day on fleet maintenance.
Okay.
It's not that simple. It comes down to many factors, and then he has other assignments that may draw him away from fleet maintenance. So, you know, I can do my best to kind of give you a rough idea, and some of these are a little more straightforward. School resource officer is another one that jumps out at me. We actually have 2, but that's not actually out of our budget. It's out of the school department budget.
Yep.
The third officer is a supervisor who oversees the schools. So he's not in the schools. I mean, he is assigned there to oversee the schools all day, but he's not a patrolman. So there's a couple things here that they're popping out to me now, and maybe they should have sooner, but I apologize because they did send it to me to review, and I did review it, and those numbers seemed accurate, but when we put it in this context, I could see a need for a slight modification of this.
Thank you. So I guess that's pretty much it for me with the questions. The last thing I want to point out is the big 3 thing. That stands out to me too. I agree with it. Strategic plan. This kind of help, and then not just with regards to systems, but as well as finance and budget-wise, as well as maintenance for operations and day-to-day stuff. There should be a variety of strategic plans. And then another last piece that came out to me in the report is they kept mentioning mission and vision statements, but there was no mission and vision statement mentioned at all. So do we know what the mission and vision statement of the Holyoke Police Department is?
There's one on the website.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Vacan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one final question, and not necessarily for an answer right now, but that number that jumped out to me on page 32 about Holyoke having 60 patrol officers compared to Chicopee having 120. I'm getting a little bit of a sense that those numbers might not be as straightforward as they look on the paper, Chief. And this could be for a future discussion. But that looked really kind of stunning, you know, in comparison. So just in general, do you think that reflection is accurate, or it somehow looks worse than it is?
I think what I see here is patrol officers. My assumption on that was assigned to patrol, specific patrol, not just our overall patrol officers, which the other sheet kind of explains that some of those patrol. So when we talk about patrol officers, that's almost like a rank. If you're talking about patrol, doing patrol, that's how I was sort of looking at this chart.
Okay.
If I'm wrong, guys, but 60 patrol officers. I mean, we obviously have more than 60 patrol officers, but again, the other chart explains where some of them are in other specialized assignments, or detectives, or even a detective is technically a patrol officer. It's just an assignment. Detective is an assignment.
Right. So to look at it more fully, probably you would add the 34 to the 60?
Correct. That gets us to the 94. I don't know. I mean, with these numbers that we were able to get from other departments, maybe they weren't looking at it the same way.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, that's helpful. I mean, I don't want to be taking something totally literally that, you know, doesn't translate, but thank you very much. And thank you for all the work everybody did on this. And again, I just hope we just use it for a positive outcome for everybody and for our city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I want to thank you all as well. Entertain a motion that the order is complied with. Oh, wait. Oh, Chief, my bad. I
really don't want to delay this any longer because I know these guys got to get going. I just will make a statement that, you know, I'll quickly, again, thank everyone that was involved, the team from FBI, the mayor, the public relations committee, and the men and women of the Hoyok Police Department who participated. You know, this is great, and it's a great baseline for us to look at. I think what's really important in the big three there, I'm not opposed to any of those things. I think that we just need to, you know, let's not leap off the ledge and jump to accreditation. My favorite new analogy, and I told these gentlemen today, it's like we're at the base camp of Mount Everest, and we got to climb that mountain. We're not going to run out there in our shorts and our T-shirt because we're not going to make it very far. We need a good team and all the equipment to do it, and then we'll start tackling that mountain. I think that one big piece for me that ran through this whole thing, and it goes directly to morale, which I know you saw, is staffing. I mean, most of our issue revolves around staffing. Accreditation, as they talk about peeling back the carpet, I hope there's some money under there because that's going to cost some money. And it's going to take more staffing to do what we want to do as far as accreditation. If all the key stakeholders that we talk about, we can talk about things, that entire list of 34 people, there's a lot of work that goes on there. I don't want to give the impression that those 34 people are sitting in a closet somewhere just collecting a paycheck. There's a lot of work that goes into the Detective Bureau. Evidence collection, as he mentioned, is probably overburdened. I could probably use more people in every single, as you mentioned, in all the departments in the city. But I just want to say, let's use this collectively. Let's move forward let's get some strategic plans on things that we can. I should note that some of the things have already been addressed. I've already assembled what I call my accreditation team here, and we're already looking at a lot of this stuff, and some of this stuff has already been addressed. And our plan is to sort of dig through this, pick out the things, what we talked about, the low-hanging fruit, and get some small victories right out of the gate. The cameras and the keypad system is already done. So that's one that, you know, obviously when they were here, it wasn't. There was a backlog on equipment, and we were waiting, but it's gotten done. And so another thing that we're working on hard between the union, the mayor, the city council as well, is we are getting towards that number of 94, which we haven't been at for probably well over a decade. When we hire this next round of officers, we will be there for the first time in probably well over a decade. And so that took us well over a year to get to where we are. And when I say that, we won't really be there till the fall, when those officers get out of the academy and we catch up. And yes, we'll have some retirements, but that number won't be as significant as it is if we lose 3 or 4 officers. That's not like trying to fill 10 or 12 spots. We're finding out, we're getting to a point, we're getting there. There's light at the end of the tunnel. The mayor and I talk about it all the time. But you're just not going to get there overnight. So we've worked real hard the last year and a half to get there. We've identified a lot of these things. I mean, I didn't come in as chief and not look at this. I haven't been sitting around waiting for the audit to come out. So I think the public should know that we have been addressed some things already, and we're going to look at everything that's been put in this report and do our best to fill whatever we can. All I ask for the council is to just, work with us, obviously, and be patient, because, Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're not going to fix this overnight, but we are making strides, and we're heading in the right direction. I truly believe that.
Thank you. I second that piece of staffing. But with that, I want to associate sacrifice, right? There's going to have to be sacrifice for more staffing, right? So like evidence, if it's a police officer doing that, we would want that staff to be more staffing on the street and have a civilian doing some of that. So there has to be some sacrifice eventually. You'll get the staffing, but we have to worry about the sacrifice piece too at the same time. Councilor McGee?
No, you had a question?
What about just systems?
I don't know. Go ahead.
It sounds like also more staffing is helpful everywhere, but also we're finding in City Hall that, better use of systems or changing the way systems are used or implementing new systems is a big help too. So I come from like more of an operations background, and I always look at a situation and think, okay, how can we do this better with what we have now? You can't fix everything with just what you have, but it sounds like you've also identified some areas where systems could be implemented or improved upon to make things easier for everyone, and hopefully that's happening too.
Thank you, Councilor Givner. Councilor McGee.
Yeah. One, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the report. Chief, Mayor, thank you. Men and women of the police department, thank you for what you do. When this was brought to our attention, in essence, to do the interviews, I'll own it. I mean, if you want to have to look at someone, the question was, can we get people to sit with the group to, answer questions and see what concerns are? So I recommend some people just to kind of fill that. Taking a step back, should I just said, yeah, do all of them? Well, I mean, not knowing the full grasp of what we're trying to get at, yeah, hindsight being 20/20, yeah, that's what we should have done. But as I said to you when we sat right here, I don't work down there. I don't know what's going on day to day. That's why we have a chief. We have all these other officers who do that. Our job as counselors is to get a budget. We can cut a budget. We can't add to it. We can't negotiate contracts. We are limited as to our scope as to what's going on down there. So with the audit coming in, our request was, can you kind of help us out to see what is going on to get as the line has been used tonight, a baseline. I think that's what we got. This is not going to be fixed in a day. I was going to ask the question, and then I said, because it's late, I'll hold off. But then, Chief, you jumped in and did it, which is based on the report. What have we done? And I think you've just answered that, so I'm not going to file the order to bring you in to do that. We'll go over time, and I know you're going to catch up to it. The main thing I've seen from this is, I'm not trying to be facetious, but I find it funny. Payroll as an option. It's done by papers and everything else. I specifically, as the chair of finance, fought tooth and nail to have Munis implemented throughout the entire city, to be put on track and do it correctly. I had all the department heads in here, and one by one, they'd say, I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it, this is that. Fast forward 9, 10 years later, oh, by the way, we should have Munis and get away from this. I shrugged my shoulders.
What we're doing now too?
What?
We're getting timesheets.
Yeah, it's stuff that we've addressed over the years. It's nothing new. It's just not implemented, which then falls back to the main scope as what's going on is we don't have procedures, we don't have stuff. The men and women are tired. And now we're saying put procedures in place when they're already overworked and overburdened. So now it's a catch-22. So we have to stop, take a step back. How do we do it in order to catch up? And that's going to be the next steps. How do we get there? I mean, do it over time. To me, I was on the phone, and then the phone kept going out, trying to get here. And the mayor, you started off correctly. It's something that you and I have been working on. It's got to be positive. Whatever we do, it's got to be positive going forward, because the old way of doing stuff didn't get there. I'm not mad. I'm not taking a shot. I'm putting it out there as full disclosure. The first thing I saw when I was reading through it was counselors being a threat. That, to me, took me back a bit. I don't agree with some of the things that are said in this chamber. It happens, heat of the moment. I spoke with the police, I spoke with the counselors. Let's work together to move forward from that issue, whatever issue it is. I think the type of wording, if we're trying to be positive, have a baseline, everything going forward, should have been, these are some pain points. Something a little more positive. So to me, once again, the men and women of the city of Holyoke, I know the vast majority of them do a phenomenal job at that police department. Phenomenal. We got some pain points because we don't get to see it every day as to what's going on down there and how do we fix the problems. I thank you for helping us get to a baseline to do that. It'll be our job now to reassess or whatever we need to do. But I thank you all for being here very, very late and for putting in the time. But to the counselors, to the police department, I thank you all for what you're doing because, there's no easy solution to it. But together, we can find a way to make it work.
Thank you, Councilor McGee. Entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Not yet.
No,
Gotta make a motion.
Say it's complied with.
Yeah, comply
I'd like
first.
to make a
Gotta
motion
say-
that
gotta
9 and
or
10
the
are
other nine
complied
is-
with.
Second.
Ooh, nice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now I accept the motion to
Motion
adjourn.
is to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Good night.